Gwendolyn Faraday previously created one of the most popular Vue courses on the internet. Now she's back with an all-new full Vue course to teach the latest version to absolute beginners.
Hi everyone, my name is Gwendolyn Faraday and I will be your instructor for this course. I have been a professional software developer for over 5 years now, and I have had the opportunity to work in several different languages and frameworks over the years, including Angular, React, and Vue JS. I currently work as a software consultant in various technologies and use Vue JS as my preferred front-end framework for any type of web or mobile application. If you would like to reach out to me, you can find me anywhere online at Faraday Academy. If you have any specific feedback for this course, please email me at gwenf@protonmail.com. I hope you enjoy this course. Vue JS is a JavaScript framework for building applications and websites. How does it help you? It provides tools out of the box to help you make your websites and apps faster and more dynamic. And it also gives you a set of standards for code organization and expectations for individuals and teams that work in the same code base. If you have heard of the virtual DOM before, Vue JS is a virtual DOM framework. If you don't know what that is, it's okay. It's not important for understanding this course. The virtual DOM basically makes JavaScript web applications a little bit faster and more efficient. Vue by itself is extremely lightweight. You can get it down to about 8 or 10 kilobytes gzipped. Although in a practical sense, your Vue and bundled JavaScript will probably never be that small in an application anyway. Although it is good to know that Vue doesn't have a lot of extra code taking up more space in your application. Why does Vue JS call itself a progressive framework? They use the term progressive to mean that you can use it anywhere from small features on websites where you want to add some interactivity and using it as kind of a drop-in replacement for jQuery in legacy applications, all the way up to using it as a more full-featured, batteries-included framework for large-scale applications like a Gmail or Twitter or something like that. You get to decide what features you want to add in from the Vue ecosystem beyond the core library. And it's extremely flexible to allow you to choose the tools and other libraries you want on your own, or you can use the ones that Vue provides in its ecosystem by default. Many people and companies are using it for its incrementally adoptable nature. That means that if they have a legacy application, it's quite simple to update their application page by page to turn it into a Vue application, into a more modern application, instead of having to rewrite the whole app at once. That is one very convenient thing about Vue JS. Let's look at a really quick overview of the history of Vue. The Vue project was started in 2013 by its founder, Evan You. In 2014, version 1 launched, and it started to become popular in China, where Evan You is from. A few years later, Vue 2 was launched with many new updates and improvements over Vue version 1. And with the release of version 2 is really where we start to see the massive growth of Vue JS in popularity in the rest of the world. So many developers had not heard of Vue JS before 2017, but from 2017 and especially in 2018 and 2019, Vue really solidified itself as one of the top 3 JavaScript frameworks. Many Vue conferences started popping up, lots of content creation around the Vue ecosystem started to take place, and many companies started to use Vue for their applications as well. In fact, many companies that you recognize, which are household names in the West, use Vue JS now. And now we can see that Vue version 3 has been released in fall of 2020. And along the way, over these last 6 years, we see many different libraries that are also created and maintained by Evan You and the core team of Vue like the Vue CLI, Vue Router, and Vuex, also being regularly updated to match with the current version of Vue. Even now with Vue 3 just released, we see that a new version of Vue Router and Vuex have also been released to be compatible with Vue version 3. In this course, we will be using the Vue JS core library as well as the Vue CLI. For more information on Vuex, Vue Router, Vue Test Utils, and some of the other tools in the Vue ecosystem that I don't cover in depth in this course, I will be making future courses about those on my Faraday Academy YouTube channel. So let's get started with learning Vue.js. And keep in mind, I'm using Vue 3 here, so make sure you are at the correct website, which is v3.vuejs.org, and then click on Getting Started here. This will take you to the documentation and by default the introduction to Vue.js. I'm going to go straight to the installation link on the sidebar here. And if I scroll down, I can see the place where it says CDN. And you'll notice here it says Vue at next. Make sure you are importing the right library from the right URL here. At next is necessary because Vue 3 is not in the main Vue.js repository yet. It's in this other repository that you can reference with at next, which points to Vue 3. Until the whole ecosystem and everything finishes getting updated, there is going to be a difference between importing Vue 2 and importing Vue at next, which points to Vue version 3. And I'm going to go ahead and grab this script tag here. So I'm in VS Code and I just have a basic HTML file. And I'll be adding Vue.js into this application to demonstrate the basics of Vue syntax before I get into building a larger application with the Vue CLI. So first of all, I'm going to be using a VS Code plugin called Live Server. And you can see at the bottom here it says Go Live. So if you go to plugins, which is this 4-box icon on the side, you can type in Live Server and click on this plugin. And you can install it if you do not already have it installed. But I already have it installed and enabled. So I'm going to go back to my code over here. And at the bottom, I'll just click Go Live. And you can see it shows my HTML page. I'll just zoom in a little bit here with the static content. Now, if you don't want to use Live Server, you can just come here and right-click and click on Copy Path. And then you can go to your browser and paste that absolute path to the project or to your index.html file. And it will display the same way in the browser. Live Server just makes things a bit easier because it will automatically refresh when you make code changes. And it also opens up the browser page for you. But it's up to you if you want to use it or not. So now I want to add Vue to this application. So I'm going to go inside of the body tag and just below this div, just paste in the script tag that I just copied. So now this is all that I have to do to import Vue and start using it in my application. I don't actually need Babel or anything else to get started. So to write my own custom code, I'm going to add my own script tag right below that. So there's basically two things that I need to do here. And the first is to use this Vue variable that I have access to from importing Vue in that script tag. And Vue gives me this method called createApp. And that basically creates my Vue application, and I can pass it an options object, which I'll get to in a second. Now I need to somehow connect this JavaScript for my Vue application with the HTML that I'm going to be displaying in the browser. And that is through another method that I can actually chain on to this Vue instance I'm creating. So I'm actually going to save this as a variable. I'm going to say let app equals vue.createApp, and then I'm going to use this other method called mount because I want to tell it to mount my Vue application somewhere in my HTML here. So I'll do ID equals, I'll just call it app. and I'm actually going to tell it to mount my Vue JS application inside of that div. And that means that the Vue JS instance that I'm creating here will be able to connect and display data and interact with any kind of DOM element inside of this div here. So that will be more clear in a second. So now let me change this. Let me create a variable on my Vue instance. And to do this, I need to create a function called data here. Now this whole object here is called the options object. So any variables or functions that I'm going to use in my application will live on this object here. So specifically with data, that is a function, and it needs to return an object. And on this object that is returned by the data function, I can put whatever variables I want. So I'm gonna create a greeting variable, and I'm basically going to say hello Vue3, then exclamation point. And now I can actually go into my div here, delete that static code there, and I'm going to use my variable now. So to use a variable in Vue, you use this double curly brace syntax. It's called double mustache syntax, which is kind of hard to pronounce, so you can just call it double curly braces. It's a common syntax in templating languages, and it basically means that anything found in between these sets of double curly braces will be parsed as JavaScript by Vue. So Vue is first going to look inside of this data object that we're returning and see if there is a variable named greeting, and then it is going to display that variable or the value of that variable inside of these curly braces. And you can see that now it displays the greeting variable from our Vue instance. Let's talk about Vue JS directives. They are basically a way to connect elements in our HTML or template here with the Vue JS JavaScript. And let's see what that looks like through an example. I'm going to create an input here. In the browser, it looks like this. Now, what if I want to get the value out of this input? Vue has a built-in way to do that through a directive called vModel. Now, these directives in Vue are used just like an HTML attribute, but they are prepended with v- to differentiate them from regular HTML attributes. And Vue, when it is parsing this Vue application, will see this keyword vModel and will bind it to whatever variable we pass in as an argument to vModel here. So here inside quotes, I need to put a variable name, and I'm actually going to put the variable greeting here. And let's see what that does. So you can see now in my input, it actually starts off with the text hello Vue. And as I change it, it also changes the greeting variable that is displayed on the page. This is called two-way data binding and is handled in Vue with that vModel directive. Let's look at another directive. I'm going to create an HR here, and I'll make a div with a class of box, and I'm going to use another directive here called vIf, which also takes an argument, which will be another variable. So I'm going to set an isVisible variable, which I have to create. So let me do isVisible and set this to true to start. I am going to paste in some styling that I made. This is just to style the box so you can see it on the page. I'll fold that. You can see that I do see that box because this vIf directive is basically just like an if statement in JavaScript. So if this value is truthy, then this element will be displayed on the page. But if it's false, this div will not be rendered to the DOM at all. So let me change this variable to false. And you can see the box disappears. And if I check, I can inspect element, and there is no div found in the DOM. Now vif is very similar to vshow, which is another Vue JS directive. It takes the same kind of argument, a Boolean expression, and let me set this to true again. You can see if it's true, it shows on the page, just like vif. However, when it's false, you can see there's still a div rendered to the DOM. The only difference is the style is set to display none. So you won't actually see it, but it is there in the DOM. So when would you use vshow? Well, in most cases, you would just use vif, because you either want something to render or not. Like if you have a loading spinner, you would use vif, it's loading, show the spinner, and then when the page or whatever has loaded, you would set the variable to false, and then vif would remove it from the DOM. Now vshow is useful for specific cases when you might need to toggle something more frequently, and it would be more performant than adding and removing it to the DOM constantly. So it's already there, all you're doing is changing the CSS, so you're changing it from display none to display block. So changing this back to vif, there are other directives that you can chain onto vif. There's velsif and velse. And you can already guess what these do, so I'm just going to show you the syntax here. So velsif, and velse is the one that doesn't take any argument. And I'm just going to demonstrate these really quickly. I'll add another variable here. So is visible to. So I've added a little bit more CSS here to differentiate between the three boxes that I've created here. And this works as a regular if-else statement. So if isVisible is true, this div will be rendered. If it's not true, it's going to keep going down the chain. So it'll look at any velse ifs you have here. You can have as many as you want. So then it will look at isVisible to see if that is true. If that's not true, then it will automatically display this third box. Now the third box is blue, the second box is red, and the first box is purple. So you can see the blue box displayed because the other two values were false. Likewise, I could change one of these variables to true, and then that box would be rendered in the DOM here. Now I want to point something out here. If I refresh the page, you can see for a split second, you actually saw all of the boxes render, as well as the curly braces show up on the screen here before it was parsed as a Vue variable. I'm going to refresh the page again and slow it down a little bit, just in case you couldn't see that. So how do I prevent that from happening? Vue has something called vcloak, which is a convenient utility that will hide anything from rendering until the whole Vue application is ready. So I'm going to add a vcloak here, and then I basically need to add a style for it. So you can see I'm setting vcloak, or this vcloak attribute, to display none. This is the recommended pattern in Vue JS. And then I just add a vcloak to my div with my app in it. Now if I go back here and refresh, you no longer see the curly braces or the other boxes render. How does that happen? I'm going to go to inspect element, and you can see on the div with ID app here, there is no vcloak attribute. But if I refresh the page, you can't really see it because it's too fast, but basically that vcloak attribute remains on this div until the app is loaded, and then it's removed once everything is rendered to the DOM. I don't often run into cases where I have to manually use this, but it is a nice feature to know about if you run into that issue. These were just a few basic directives. We will definitely be covering more directives as we go along in this course. In the next video, we will go over events and methods in Vue JS. Now that you've seen how to use variables and directives in Vue JS, Let's make this code a little bit more interactive with events. So you probably already know that there are many events that can be captured in the browser and used in our applications. For example, when the user clicks on an element on the screen, like a button, or if the user presses a certain key on the keyboard, like enter to submit a form. Let's try out both of these cases in our little mini application here. First, I'm going to get rid of the 2 extra boxes. And I'm going to add a button here, which for right now I will label as showbox. So right now this vIf is set to false, or the variable isVisible is set to false. So this div will never be rendered on the page unless we somehow update that variable. Before we were hard coding the variable value here as true or false, but we can actually use this button to change the variable value as well. And this is done with another directive called v-on. Now the v-on directive is specific for events. You can use it for custom events that you create yourself, or you can use it for any of the standard browser events, like, as I mentioned before, when a user clicks or presses a key on their keyboard. So here specifically, I'm going to do v-on : and then the type of event, which will be a click event. So I'm listening for a click event on this button right now. But now when someone clicks on the button, I have to tell Vue what to do with that click event. So I need to pass in an argument of whatever JavaScript I want to run when this button is clicked. And for right now, I will keep it simple, and I'm going to set the isVisible variable to true when that button is clicked. Now you can see I have this button show box. When it's clicked, the box shows. What if I want to hide the box? Right now this only shows the box, and the only way to get rid of it is by refreshing. I can set up a toggle for the box by simply saying isVisible equals the opposite of whatever it currently is. So isVisible equals not isVisible. So if it's true, it will be set to false. If it's false, it will be set to true. And this should toggle our box. I'll relabel this to toggle box. And now, if I keep clicking, it toggles on and off. That is basically how events work. There's also a shorthand for creating events, so you don't have to type out v-on : You can just type the @ symbol and then the event name. And this is exactly the same thing as it was when I typed v-on : the @ symbol just replaces all of that. So what if you wanted to do something more complex in here, not just setting a variable to true or false? Well, you can actually use this to pass in any kind of method on your Vue JS object. So I'm going to get rid of isVisible here, and I'm going to create a method called ToggleBox. And now I have to create this ToggleBox method. You can see I already have data on my Vue JS object, this data function, but now I need to make another key, which is called methods. And methods is an object of functions. I can put as many functions as I want on this methods object to be able to use these in my Vue JS application. So let me create that ToggleBox function. I could do the same thing here as I did above, but I'm just going to use the function shorthand. And I want the same logic again, but inside this function. So in order to refer to this isVisible variable here, I have to get it off of the this context. And Vue.js handles putting all of my methods and variables on the this context so that they're available to me anywhere in my Vue application. So I can do this.isVisible and then set it equal to not this.isVisible. This is not a function there. And this should work the same way as it did before. So I can test it out and toggle the box once again. So that is the basics of how methods work. And you can see because I have called my method ToggleBox that it is also available to me anywhere inside my Vue.js template here. So let's look at one more type of event, and that will be an event listening for keyboard input. So here I want to listen for key presses. This is also an event, so I'm going to start with the @ symbol and listen for a key up event. I could also use key down if I wanted to. So for keyboard events, I need to add a modifier to say which keyboard input I am listening for. So for input here, I want to run a function or some JavaScript whenever I press the enter key. So for enter, I actually have a shorthand because this is a common keyboard input. So I can say, listen for the key up event specifically with the enter key, or I can always use the key code associated with any key on the keyboard. So for enter, that would be 13. It doesn't matter which one I use. I'm just going to go ahead and use keyup.enter because it's a bit more obvious what it is. And then it's the same syntax here. And I'm going to create a greet method for this key up event. So let me go down to my methods, create a method called greet, use the method shorthand, and I'm actually just going to console.log this.greeting. And let's see how that works. So I can just focus this input anywhere and just hit enter. It doesn't matter what's already in the input. And you can see it logs out the greeting. If I change the input, it logs out whatever the greeting variable is currently set to. Now, what if I want to pass something into a function as I'm calling it into one of these methods? Then I could do that just by adding the parentheses to call the function. So for example, greet here, I can just pass something in. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to pass in the greeting through the template here. I'm going to accept that here, and I'll still call it greeting, and then get rid of this because I'm no longer looking for the greeting variable on the Vue.js instance here. I am actually just going to be using the greeting variable that I am passing in here. And just to show you that it's different, I can use the greeting variable and then pass it in with some exclamation points appended to it. And now when I go here and I click enter again, you can see that it is the greeting variable that I passed in through the template. If I erase a few characters here, hit enter again, you can see it's still the same variable set to the new value. Those are the basics of how to use events and methods in Vue.js. I do want to point out here, you see this .enter, that is an event modifier in Vue.js. So you're not only listening to the key up event, you're listening to specifically the enter key. Now there are many modifiers that you can use. For example, at this click event here, for example, I could add a modifier here that says I'm only listening for right clicks. So a normal left click on a mouse will not trigger this toggle box, but only if you make a right click. I can also use some handy modifiers like prevent. So if I don't want a form to submit, instead of using the regular event.prevent default in my method, I can just add this modifier here .prevent. And I can do that for stop propagation as well. So I could add .stop. You can chain as many of these modifiers as you want in Vue.js. They're definitely a handy thing to know about when you're building Vue applications. That's all for this video. We will be diving deeper into events and methods later on in this course and in future courses. In the next video, we're going to talk about custom components in Vue.js. Let's talk about Vue components. Now, when we created our Vue application here, we are basically just using one standard component, you could call it, just a default options object for use in our template. So now we're going to work on breaking up parts of our application into separate components in order to prepare for learning how to build larger applications and work on applications with the Vue CLI. outside of a single HTML file. Let's take a break from the code for a second and take a look at what we are going to be building with Vue components. We're going to use a simple example of a form to work on breaking up an application into separate components. Now, where you see the red outline, those are each going to be a separate component. So the outer red outline around the whole login form will be its own login form component, and then each input with its label will be a custom input component that we are going to create and be able to reuse for as many inputs as we have. So we're going to start off with this outer component and then break out the inner components into their own components after that. And then we are going to look at how you can pass data around between components in your application. So what would a Vue component look like? Let's say we wanted to have a form in here, and I'm going to get rid of this greeting really quick and put a form here. So I could do this directly in the HTML and create a form tag, or I can create a custom tag as a Vue component called custom form. Now this is the same syntax as if it were an HTML tag, except of course it is not a standard HTML tag, so I have to define it as a Vue component down here. And I need to define it after I define my app variable, which is my Vue instance, and before I actually mount it to the DOM. So I can chain this here as app.component. This is a function, and it takes two arguments here that I'm going to pass in. So the first one is the name of the component that I'm going to use, and that is the name that I'm going to be using in my HTML up there. So I'll give it the same name, custom form. And the second is an options object. And since this is its own self-contained component, I can actually use any of the same options that I've been using here, such as data and methods, etc. The only extra thing that I need right now is I have to define a template for this component. And the easiest way to define a template is by using Graves, so I can make this multi-line, and pass in the HTML here. So real quick, I'm going to create a div, and I'm just going to put, let's say, 2 inputs in here for right now. I'll put a type of email, and then an input type of password. And let's call this a login form since we're doing email and password. I'll change that up here to login form. And since template is the only required option that I need to pass in on this object, it should run like it is right now. So let me see if this works. I'm going to go live. And you can see these 2 form inputs up at the top here. Completely unstyled, just basic browser inputs. So I'm going to style these inputs really quickly so they're easier to see. After all of these boxes, I'm going to add a reference to input here. I'm going to say margin of 10 pixels just on all sides, and a display of block so they don't go inline. And now they are a bit easier to see here. All right, let me code fold these styles again. And now let me add a data method to this component so you can see what that looks like. So after this template key I have here, I'm going to do the same thing I did above with data. I'll just use the function shorthand here. I'll return an object, and here I'm going to give it a title. And the title will be login form. And now I need to do something with this title. So up here, when I defined variables, I used them inside of my app template here. But since my login form is a self-contained component, any variables I define on data here, I'm going to have to use them inside its own template. So I'll just add another line here and give it an H1. And by the way, this doesn't have syntax highlighting and is in kind of a weird template form. Because I am just doing this all in one HTML file, this is just a stepping stone to get to more standard ways of creating Vue components where you will have syntax highlighting and auto-completion and all of those other great features. So here I need to use that variable title, so I'll use that the same way I did before by referencing it. And now I should see the title on top of those two input boxes. And indeed I do here. I am zoomed in quite a bit. So that is the basics of how you can create a component here. I'm going to go ahead and keep building out this form and then also show you how to compose components now. So I'm just going to change this really quickly to form, and then I'm going to add some submit functionality here. So I'm going to add event for submit, and then pass in an argument with the method I want to run or the function I want to run when I submit a form. So I'm just going to call my function, I suppose, handle submit, and then I need to make a methods object down here with that function. I'll call it handle submit, and I will just console.log submitted. So now when the form submits, it will run this function. There's a few more things that I need to do. I need to add a button here that will actually submit the form. So by default, buttons are type submit, so I don't need to add that here. But I am going to add some text to the button. Now when the form submits, it refreshes the whole page. Of course, this is the default behavior in browsers, so you can just automatically click and send data from the form to your backend. But since we are going to be handling the form submission from our handle submit function, we don't want this default behavior with the page refresh. So like we saw earlier, we have event modifiers. So we can do prevent to prevent default. This would be the same thing as passing in an event object to our handle submit function and then doing e.prevent default. Again, this is just a shorthand. So now if we look at our console here, we see that it logs submitted when we submit the form. So now we probably want to be capturing these inputs. So we can do that again by using the directive vModel to bind the value of the form input to a variable. We'll call this one email, and we'll vModel this one as password, and then add these into data. And now let's log those out. So let's log out email and password. Of course, if you remember, I have to get it off of the this context since I'm referencing it inside of JavaScript here. And now I should be able to type in something here. This has to be an email. So I'll say gwen@example.com, just any password, and I'll click login. And you can see it did log out my credentials here. Okay, so that's one component. In the next video, let's look at how to break up this component and take out the inputs to put them in separate components, as you saw in the mockups earlier in this video. And we'll also look at how to pass data between components, so from a parent component to a child, and then also from a child back up to the parent. So what if we want to compose multiple components together? Let's demonstrate this by removing the inputs and creating a custom component just for our form inputs. Let's say we want some logic just contained within a special input component. So let me fold this real quick. And I'm going to create another component here. I'll do app.component again. And I'm going to call this custom input. Pass in an options object. Again, I need to have a template here. And in this one, I'm just going to have label. I'm going to display a label variable here, and then I'll have that wrap around the input. And I'll use a type, just the default text for right now. I'll change that in a second. And that is a default input. So now where am I going to use this component? So I'm actually going to replace my input fields in this component with this new one that I created. So what I can do here is call this custom input and custom input, and I can use my components inside of this other component. Now there's one more step that I have to take here, and that is registering the component. So I have to let my login form component know about the other custom component. And I can do that here by creating a components array and then just give it the string of the component that I want to be using, which is custom input. Now let's see how this works. Okay, so I have these two inputs. Now it is giving me this warning that property label was accessed during render but is not defined on the instance. This is happening because here I'm referencing this variable label, but it is not defined anywhere, so it's giving me that warning. Now I could define a data function here and create the variable on this component, but I want to demonstrate passing data from one component to another. So instead of defining it on this component, I'm actually going to define label on the parent component and pass it to the custom input component. To do that, I'm going to come here and add just a label. Let me add in, let me call it email label for right now. And I'm going to call it email. And I'll also have a password label and call this password. Now I have to get these two variables passed into these custom components here. And so what I'm going to do here, I can go ahead and get rid of the V model for just a second. And I'm going to add a label here that I'm going to pass in. And I'm going to pass in the email label. Now this looks just like an HTML attribute, but I'm actually going to add a modifier on here that is a Vue directive called vbind. What vbind does is basically turn this regular HTML attribute into something that can be parsed as JavaScript so that I can pass down a variable to the child component. So I'm vbinding this label, which is email label, which refers to this string here, which is email. This will get passed down as a property to the child component called label. And now in this custom input child component, I need to receive that property to accept it here with a props object. And the simplest way to write props is to make an array of strings, just like I did for custom components. And these props are basically just a list of all of the names of the information that I'm passing down from the parent to this child. So now because I'm defining label in props, I will have access to use the label variable here inside my template. Now if you look at the login form, you can see that the email field, it has a label here, and you can tell it's a label because when I click on the word email, it focuses on the field it's related to. So let me give a label to password now too. I'm going to pass in password here. By the way, vbind, there is also a shortcut for vbind. This is one of the most common directives in all Vue applications. So the shortcut is, instead of using vbind:, you just use colon and then label. So let me pass a label in here as well. So I'll pass a label in as password label. Since we're using this reusable component, the label will always display as the label that we pass in. And now you can see that both form fields are properly labeled here. Now I want to point one thing out really quickly, and that is for email and these password labels, you could not make variables for these and just pass them in as strings here. So for example, if I get rid of vbind of the colon shortcut there, then I could just pass in, let's say, password, and let me put enter email here so it's different. And now I can just pass in this text as a string because there's no more vbind here. Vue is no longer looking for a variable. So now in the application you can see that it's just passing the string down as a label to the child component and displaying that string. I'm going to undo those changes. When you're working in actual Vue applications, you will see that 95% of the time you want to pass a variable in when you're passing a prop down to a child component, either a data variable or some kind of a function. So you'll almost always be using this vbind syntax here. Now there's one issue, because in the child component, we have the input down here. We're not actually listening for changes to the text in the input. We're not vmodeling that to any variable, so we don't have access to whatever's inside the input. So we actually need to create a vmodel here in the child. I'm going to say vmodel. And just temporarily here, I want to map this to a variable in the child, and I'm going to just call this input value. And I need to create a data function here. Return an object with input value as an empty string. So now in this case, you're already familiar with vmodel, and you know that anytime we type a character into this input, it's going to update this variable, and the input will stay in sync. But now, how can I get the value of this variable up to the parent component here? Because I actually want it to stay in sync with these two variables on the parent component, so that way when I submit my form, I can have access to it in this handle submit function. So there are actually a couple different ways of doing this. I'm going to show you the most straightforward approach for getting started with this, and then in future courses, I'm going to explain a little bit more in depth about how you can use custom events and other methods of capturing the value of a variable from the child to the parent. So to get started here, I'm going to use my same input variable, but I'm going to use a new object here. And this object is called computed. I'm going to comment out data for a second. So computed is an object where you can put variable names in here as keys. So for example, this input value variable that I want to create, I can put it in here as a key. And whenever this value changes, I can actually get it to run getter and setter functions. So I can create a getter function and then a setter. So when I get the variable value here, it will run this function, and then when I go to set the variable value, it will run the set function. So now what value do I want to put in my getter here? I want to get that value from the parent component. So I'm actually going to use these two variables that I already have here. And I'm just going to get rid of these types. I'm not using them yet, so get rid of those. And I'm actually going to do something different. I'm going to create a vmodel directly on my custom component here. And I'll show you why in a second. And I want to model this to the variable that I'm going to be using. So for this one, that is the password variable. And for this one, that's email. And these got out of order, so I'll switch them around. Okay, so now I'm v-modeling the email and password. And now I want to get these variables in my child component here. Now, how do I do that? So in props, I can actually accept a prop called model value. And this comes from the parent. Now, it doesn't really look like we are passing in another prop because we're not v-binding any variable and passing it to the child. But actually what v-modeling does on a child component is actually under the hood, it's giving us another prop called model value, which is mapped to email. So vmodel does a few steps all at once. It's kind of a shorthand here. So I have access to this model value prop because I'm using vmodel. So I can accept that prop in the child here, vmodel, and then in my getter function, I can do this dot model value, and I can return that. So now whenever I get the value for this input, it should be the same as the value in the parent component. And I can check that by just typing in some values here. And you can see that the inputs are pre-populated with the value from the parent component because I am v-modeling this input to a getter function that I'm setting here and saying that the value will be this dot model value, which comes from the v-modeled variable in the parent component, which are these variables. So now how do we handle setting the value if we type text into this input here? So we need to capture the value first, and Vue passes this in via a parameter, so we can give this parameter any name that we want. I'm just going to call it value, and I'm just going to first log out this value. And so here I can try typing in, and you can see it's logging out the value of the input from that log in the setter function. But now it's not setting a variable anywhere. So let me go ahead and set the variable. Now to do that, I'm going to use a new method that you haven't seen yet, and that is this dot $emit. What emit does is allow me to emit events that other components can listen to, and I can pass data around my Vue application like that. I can emit events that are built in, like I could emit some kind of on-click event or something like that, or I can emit a custom event that I create. For right now, I'm going to use an event that Vue gives me, and this is called an update event. This syntax is actually new, slightly updated in Vue 3. So if you see older tutorials, it might not be using this exact same syntax. It will probably be using an input event here instead. But I'm going to pass in a value here. Oops, I need a comma. So this first argument is the type of event that I'm emitting, and the second argument is the value that I'm passing through that event, which is this value that I'm getting from the input via the set function. Now, how can I listen for an event in another component? I could set this manually, but like I said before, vmodel is a shorthand. So vmodel is actually listening for this update event from my child. And whenever this update event emits, this vmodel from the parent component is updating the value of the variable for us. Let's test this out. I'm going to start typing here, and I'm going to press login. And you can see that it logs out the values of the email and password. So this isn't that clear, so let me put a real email here, or real fake email anyway. And you can see there's the email and there's the password, which are coming from this log statement in handle submit. Now you might be wondering, why do we have to go through all that trouble to model a variable from a child to a parent? And the reason why is because the props that we pass to children, they are immutable. We cannot change them in the child. These variables on data here can only be changed in the same component. So my custom input can't change anything we pass in via props here. So for example, if I tried to model this to label here, I'm getting all of these warnings attempting to mutate prop label. Props are read-only. So I'm going to undo that. So that's why I had to create this extra variable in the child and create a getter. So I'm getting this read-only model value prop from the parent. And then what I'm doing to update the value of that prop is I'm emitting an event to the parent, this update model value event. So the parent, because I have this vModel shorthand, is listening for that event. And this component, this login form component, is actually updating these variables itself. So I'm not actually mutating props from the child. Now there are definitely other ways of handling changing props. In the child component, I could listen for changes on this input, and I could call a method on a methods object, which could do this same thing, either emit an event. I could also pass a function from the parent to the child, and the child can call functions in the parent, and then I could update variables in that way too. There are also other state management solutions, and we will explore all of these different options later. I just wanted to give you an initial taste of how this can be done in Vue JS, and specifically in Vue version 3, now that the syntax has changed a little bit. So in this video, we've gone over custom components, composing components together, importing them into each other, like we are with this custom input into the login form component. We also talked about using props, passing data from the parent to the child, and then being able to set data by emitting an event that the parent can listen to and passing it a value. In the next video, we are going to talk about loops in Vue to simplify our syntax here with having multiple of the same component. Now let's talk about loops here. We have two of the same component, these custom input components, and I would like to just be able to loop through as many of these components as I want. To do this, I need to add an array in data here, and this array will have all of the information for each input here, including the variable that I want to model to, the label name, and I'm also going to add a type. So I'm going to create an array here called inputs. And just to demonstrate really quickly, I'm going to add just some strings here, like email, password, and let's say name. So what if I wanted to display all three of these strings inside the template here? I'm going to come back to looping over the form in a second. But for right now, I'm just going to create a p tag here. And I want to show each one of these strings inside its own paragraph tag. So I'm going to create a loop for these. I'm going to say v4 equals, and then I need to pass in the array here, which is called inputs. And this will loop over the inputs array. Now this is a for in loop, so I'm going to have to create a variable that I can use in the iterations. So I'm going to say for str, short for string, in inputs, and now I have access to this string variable each time through the loop. And I can basically just display it in a variable now. Right, so it is complaining that I made a mistake in my syntax, and of course that is because I didn't put a comma after my array. And now you can see that these top three here are strings that are displayed in a paragraph tag. Of course they are so big because I am zoomed in so far, but they are displaying properly. And that is basically how you use a loop in Vue JS. I am missing a prop here that I need to add. Whenever you do a loop, you have to add a key prop here. And this key has to be unique on each iteration of the loop. Now, the reasons for using this key prop are a little bit more advanced, so I'm not going to go in depth on it in this video, but I just want you to understand that it is good practice for you to use a key that will uniquely identify any elements that you loop through in your Vue JS templates. This can help with performance and preventing bugs in your applications. And when you move into programming a more structured Vue application with Vue components in their own files, you will see that your linter and code editor will pick up on it if you don't have a key value here, and it will give you a warning and ask you to add one. So we have to have a key to give a unique reference to each one of these paragraph tags we're adding into the template. Now what I can do, since the names are unique here, each string is different, so I can vbind to key the string variable str. This is a really simple Vue application, so you basically don't notice a difference in the browser, but Vue can see that there are keys attached to these elements now. I want to point out though that one more way that you can create this unique key every time through the loop is you can actually get an index through each iteration of the loop. You can get I here and then use it as your key. And if I print out I, you can see that I is the index of each iteration in the loop. I'm going to put that back as string. So this was just a demonstration, of course, so I'm actually going to get rid of this whole p tag here. And what I really want to be putting in inputs here are objects for the information that has to do with each input that I want. So the first one, let me put a label here, and I'm going to say the label is email. I'm going to create a value here, and this was what I'm going to vmodel to. And then I'll go ahead and add a type. So let's say type is email. And I'll do the same thing for password. And I can get rid of those now. Alright, so now my application is broken because I got rid of all the data that I had been passing into these custom inputs. And actually I'm going to get rid of one of these custom inputs because now I'm going to be looping over just one, and it will create one for each iteration of the loop. Let me clean this up a little bit, put these on separate lines. And so the first thing I want to do is create a v4 here. And this v4 will loop through inputs just as I did before. I'm going to say for input in inputs. And I'm actually going to get the index here really quick as well. And then use a key, I'll vbind the index. So now I can't vmodel email. I need to vmodel based off of this input object, which is each object in this inputs array. So I'm going to have to vmodel input.value here to model it to the value. So I'll do input.value. The label also, I'm going to have to do input.label. And now I do have a type, so let me vbind a type as well. And I'm going to do input.type. So that's one thing that I need to update in this child component now. I'm still accepting that model value prop and the label prop, but I also want to accept a type prop now. And instead of doing type as text, now I have a prop from the parent based off of which component it is in the loop. So now I'm going to vbind this so it can take a variable, and I'm going to say type, which will refer to whatever prop I've passed in. So I'm going to come to my form here, and I'm going to type in, and I actually forgot to change the logging here for handle submit. So I don't want to overcomplicate things for this example. So what I'm going to do is just delete this and log out this dot inputs of 0 and that value, and then this dot inputs of 1 and then that value. And this should fix my problem here. Let me just type something in, and it's complaining that I don't have an email address, so I'm just gonna type in a fake email, log in, and you can see that it has my correct login information. So this is the basics of how to handle loops in Vue JS. Is you can use v-for either on regular HTML elements like an h1 or any custom components that you make as well. This is very commonly done with card components. If you see a website like Pinterest, how it shows all those different little boxes with pretty photos in them. If that was built in Vue JS, it would be doing this v-for loop over all of those data objects that make up all of those Pinterest cards on your Pinterest wall. The last thing we need to look at before we get into the demo application is lifecycle hooks. So we will cover those in the next video. Another important concept in Vue JS is lifecycle hooks, also called component lifecycle hooks. So what is a hook and what are component lifecycles? To understand this, I made a quick demo similar to the demo that we started off with in this course. I can click the toggle box button and a box appears. Now I'm using a v-if to take this box, add it. You can see it was added to the DOM. Now if I click again, it was completely removed from the DOM here. That whole process of coming into the DOM and then finally leaving the DOM, that is the life cycle of this box component that I have. Now, sometimes things might leave the DOM because you navigate to another page, or because something is coming into view via scrolling, or because you are hiding and showing something like this example. In any case, you can use something called lifecycle hooks. A hook is just a function that will be triggered to run at a specific point in the lifecycle of a component. For example, it's a function that will be called right when this purple box appears on the screen, or right before it leaves the screen. If you look at the Vue JS documentation, now this is the version 2 documentation here, because they don't have what I'm going to show you yet in the version 3 docs, but it is the same thing. So I'm under Learn, Guide, and then if I scroll down on the sidebar, I'm at the Vue instance and creating a Vue instance. And I can actually click on the lifecycle diagram here. So this is a diagram, like it says, of the instance lifecycle of your Vue instance. And like it says, you don't need to fully understand everything that goes on right now, but it is a useful reference. And this chart isn't just useful for your Vue instance, but every single Vue component will have access to these lifecycle hooks. So you can see these two up top in the red. All of the boxes in the red are the lifecycle hooks. You can see before create and created. These hooks will be run right before and right after Vue.js has initialized your component. Now the next two, before mount and mounted, before mount is run right before your component is mounted to the DOM, and mounted is run as soon as your component is mounted to the DOM. Components can also go through updates. So before update and updated, like it says here, this will happen, or these updates will be triggered when data changes on your component. So any of those data variables that you create, if you're incrementing a number or changing some kind of value, then updated and before update will run. And then when your component is going to leave the DOM, now here it says before destroy and destroyed. Now this terminology has been updated for Vue 3 for these two lifecycle hooks. So if we go to the Vue 3 documentation now, and we're on Lifecycle Hooks here. I'm going to scroll down so you can see before create, created, before mount, mounted, before update, and updated. I'm going to skip over some of these. And now you can see it's before unmount and unmounted, which is in place of before destroy and destroyed. The lifecycle hooks function exactly the same way. They have just been renamed. I hope this will become a little bit more clear as we look at a demo. So in the code, you can see I have the same box that we used before up here. And here is the toggle box button inside of my Vue template. But this time I do have a special test box custom component that I made, which is toggled based off of a v-if. So this is my main application and the options object with my isVisible variable for whether or not the box is visible, and then I just have a toggle box method, which I call when I click this button. So again, this is pretty much the same thing that we did before, except for this new component here. I put the box in its own component now that we've learned about composing components. And I'm just going to add some lifecycle hooks here really quickly to illustrate when these are called on the component lifecycle. So I'm just going to add a couple of them here. I'm going to add created, and then mounted, and then unmounted. And in each of these, I'll put a console.log. And let's see when these console.logs print out. Back in my browser, I'm going to hit toggle box here. And you can see in the terminal at the bottom, created printed and then mounted printed in the same order that we saw in the Vue JS documentation. So this one happened before, and then this one happened after it was mounted to the screen, to the DOM here. Now, if I hit toggle box again, we can see unmounted prints because that is run after the box leaves the DOM. Now let's look at another one. After methods here, I'm going to put a lifecycle hook on this component, or on the main Vue instance that we have here. And I'm going to try updated. And I'll hit toggle box. And you can see that we have created and mounted. Those both print from the box component itself, but from the main instance also updated prints. And that is because we are updating this data variable from isVisibleFalse to isVisibleTrue. And so the update function is triggered on this component because our data updated for that component. And if we toggle it again, we can see updated is run again because that variable was changed to false again. So updated will run every single time the data changes. Now, why might you want to use a lifecycle hook? Some of the most common use cases are checking whether someone is authorized to view a certain page or component. A lot of people use the created and mounted hooks as well to pull data into their application from a backend or from in-browser storage. Sometimes they are also used to initialize events, and then when the component is about to unmount, you can clean up that event, or you can save some data or run some kind of check on before unmount or in the unmounted function. So those are the basics of lifecycle hooks. I encourage you to test out lifecycle hooks on your different components and see what happens when you use different lifecycle hooks. In a future course, we can get into some more advanced examples and a few of the more advanced lifecycle hooks as well that you won't see as often. So those are the basics of Vue JS. In the next video, we are going to build a Vue 3 application from scratch, starting with the Vue CLI this time. This is a demo of the application that we will be building, It's a simple shop application with a few items. Now, it looks like the web page is already done, but actually it's just static HTML and CSS so far. As you can see, if I click the Add to Cart button, nothing happens. And if I scroll up, the only things that are actually functional on this site right now are these top nav links, which are just regular browser anchor tag links to bring you to another page. So this one goes to the products page, and you can see I have this cart, which is not functional. So if I click the X, nothing happens. It's just fully slid out here to demo how it will look. And if I click the X, nothing happens. It doesn't delete the item. I can't add items to the cart. And on this page, I have a past orders table, which is also just static content right now. This project is going to be a little bit different than tutorials that you are used to. We are not going to be starting from scratch with some mockups here. Instead, we will be starting with a static application with HTML and CSS already coded. Then we will figure out step by step how to add Vue JS into the application. This will help to give you a deeper understanding of how Vue works and how to build real-world Vue applications. First, I will give you an overview of the code base, and then we're going to see how it looks in the browser. And then finally, we will start with the Vue JS portion and implementing our own Vue code into each feature one at a time. The goal is to eventually reach a point where it gets to be difficult to continue to code inside of HTML, and then we are going to move the project over to a Vue CLI setup project where we will have Webpack and the full ecosystem of Vue.js tooling and libraries like Vuex and Vue Router. So let's get started looking at the code. So I'm going to start here with the package.json. Now this is the file that's generated by npm. You should have seen one of these before if you've worked with JavaScript. And it has some metadata about our project here, and then the scripts section. So you don't need to know what all of these scripts are doing. This code will be available for you, so if you want to dive deeper into each one of these, you can. But since we're focusing on Vue here, the important part is that we have this start server that compiles our styles and serves our application for us. Now later on, I'll show you how to start an application with the Vue CLI, but I had to use some kind of a temporary server here in the meantime. So that's what live server is doing for us. It will serve it on a port similar to what we did with the live server plugin that we used in VS Code for the last demo application. So to start this application, I'm going to go up to my terminal option here, and I'm going to choose new terminal, and my terminal opens at the bottom here inside my current folder. And I'm going to run the start command. So npm start, you can see that automatically opens the application on the correct port here. And if I scroll down, I can see the same page that you already saw. Now back in the code, let's look in the source directory. So the source directory is where all of our JavaScript and other code is going to live. And this is where we'll also be adding Vue.js. This is our main HTML file for the application, which is the home page. And you can see the links here go to Vue's pages inside of this Vue's directory over here. So the links will take you to the past orders page and also the products page. Now to start working with Vue.js, I'm going to start with these cards here. Right now I want to be able to update and save the quantities and be able to add them to the cart. So in this app.html file, I'm going to go ahead and add my link to Vue.js, just like I had in the last demo application. So I'm going to go to the bottom here and paste the script tag. So I'm importing Vue.js, and now I need to write some custom Vue.js code to hook up my application. So I will create another script tag, and here I'm going to do let app equal vue.create app. I'll pass it an empty object for right now. And then here I'm going to do app.mount and then mount it in the same DOM element as before with the ID of app. And let me just check here. Yes, the wrapper div here, if I fold it, you can see all of the content is created inside of app. So to get started here, I definitely want to create a data method, and I need to return an object. And on this object, I want to track my inventory. So when someone clicks the Add to Cart button, I want to increment or change the amount of inventory that I have. So inventory itself will be an object. And you can see the different types of produce that I have here. So carrots, pineapples, and cherries. And so I'm going to add these 3 items to my inventory. Carrots, and I'm going to initialize all of these with 0. That looks good. Now I need to find these elements inside my application and put the variables there. So if I look down at these cards, you can see here's the recommended product section. So I have carrots here, and I have the price. Here is the quantity with the input field. And what I want to do here, instead of setting the value, I want to do v model. And this should be inventory dot carrots. And then I'm going to copy the same thing for the other fields. So I'll come down here to pineapples and paste this. And then cherries as well. Okay, now let me take a look at that. And you can see it still shows 0 here. Just like before, I can update a number. Let me do 3 carrots. And now the number starts at 3. So now we want to do something when someone clicks add to cart. If they have a certain quantity in here, we want to add it to a cart total. Let me change this back to 0. So to do that, I need to create a method. Let me create my methods object. I'll create an add to cart method. And in this method, I need to take in the number of items that someone wants to add to their cart and also the type of item. So to do this, I'm going to need another place to store what items are actually in the cart. So I'm going to create a cart here, and for right now I'm just going to copy the same items over. And then when I call the add to cart method, I need to pass in the type of item and the quantity. Then I can access my cart variables by doing this.cart, and to pass in a variable that I want to access on my cart object, I need to use the square brackets, and then I can pass in type. So it would be the same as this.cart.carrots or this.cart.pineapples, or whichever item we want to access. And then I'm going to increment by the quantity. So plus equals quantity. Now I don't have to return anything from this function because this is really the action that I want to take by calling this function, is to update whatever I have in my cart right now. And to show this, I'm just going to log this out in the console in the browser so you can see it. I'm going to log out this.cart. And I'm going to open my console here. So for carrots, I'm going to add 3. You can see nothing happened. That is because I forgot to connect this method to that button. So let me go up here and add that button. So I'm just going to add it to carrots right now. Here. So when someone clicks on the add to cart button, I'm going to call the add to cart method. Now I need to call it passing in a few arguments here. So the first one is going to be the type of item that I want to add to the cart. So this one will be carrots, and I also need to pass in the quantity. To pass in the quantity, I need to use the inventory.carrots variable. So I can just pass that in here. I could also just call it from inside of my function, which is actually what I'm going to do. So let me scroll down to see my function again. And instead of quantity here, instead of passing in this extra variable, I'm going to just update this to this dot inventory, and then get the type from there. So let's see if this is working. Let me add to cart, and you can see there is definitely a problem because the input value is a string and it's trying to add it to the number 0, so then it turns the expression into a string. Now Vue has a very easy way of fixing this, and this is through a modifier, just like we learned about a little bit in the last demo that we did. So let me go up here to the V model, and we don't want this V model to be considered as a string. We want to go ahead and cast it as a number. So Vue gives us this modifier as a shortcut. So vModel.number. So now if we look in our application, let me add to cart, and I can see down here that my carrots have one item in it, which is a number. So I can add to cart again, and now it's 2. And I can add multiples, and now there's 8 carrots in the cart. Let's stop here for this video, and don't forget to download the related code and try out these features for yourself. In the next video, we will work on displaying the items in the cart. So now we want to hook up this cart menu or cart slide out. And right now it's just static content, so we can only see it from the products page. And if you look at the code, we go to the products.html. I'm going to fold this header and also the main container, which is this main part of the page right here. And now I can just see this aside, which is that cart section on the side. So I basically want to get all of this HTML and make it available on my other pages, like my app page, which is the home page, so that I can use Vue.js to trigger opening or closing the menu. And I also want to make these cart items dynamic. So when I add more items to the cart, it can update the quantity and the price. And I can also set a variable, so if there are no items in the cart, this will display. Now, HTML itself doesn't have something like an import to import a block of HTML into another HTML file. A lot of people use PHP or some other backend tool for that, but we can also easily do this in JavaScript. So we're going to do this in Vue.js actually. So I'm going to remove this sidebar from the page that it is on right now and move it into our Vue application. Of course, our Vue application is nested inside of the app.html page, but we can move it outside later so that this menu will be accessible on all pages in the future. So I'm going to fold this Vue.createApp, and now I will paste this HTML aside that I have. Now it's giving me an error or a couple errors right now because it's inside of a script tag, but I'm going to fix that. So if you recall, in the earlier lessons, we defined different components inside of our Vue application. So this is a perfect use case for a component right now because it's this reusable block of HTML or template that we want to use on multiple different pages and also interact with. So I'm going to register this as a component, and I'm just going to call it Sidebar. And now I pass in the object just as before. And on this options object, I can set the template and then use Graves. And now I want to grab this aside again and paste it inside of here. And so now I have this whole aside, all of the code inside of my template for this component. And now I can add this to the page with the name Sidebar. So I'm going to go ahead and add it here. And remember that our div wraps the whole Vue application, so I can put this anywhere inside of that div with ID of app. I'm going to put it here, actually between the main and the footer. I'm going to put the custom component sidebar. And Vue will handle putting the template I have down here where this sidebar element is in the template. So let me go back to the HTML here. You can see the sidebar is no longer on the products page, but if I go to the home page, now I have a sidebar here. So now that the sidebar is in Vue.js, I can start making it interactive. And the first thing I want to do is be able to hide and show the sidebar. So basically when this is clicked, I want to hide it, and then when another button is clicked, I want to show it. So I need to create a variable for this. And let me go down to my JavaScript down here. So inside of my regular create app here, in my main options object, I'm going to add an element to data here. And I'm going to call it show sidebar false. And now I can come to my sidebar and simply use a vif and point it to the variable show sidebar. So if show sidebar is true, then my custom component will show up on the page. If it's false, then I shouldn't see the sidebar at all. And you can see it's false. I don't see any sidebar. And when I change this to true, I see the sidebar. Now I just need to add a toggle for this sidebar. Let me change it back to false by default. And now I can create a method called toggle sidebar. And I'm going to say this dot show sidebar equals the opposite of whatever it is, because it will toggle true or false every time this function is run. So I'm going to say it equals not this dot show sidebar. So if it's currently false, that means it will be set equal to true, and if it's true, it will be then set equal to false. Now I just have to call this method. So the first place that I'm going to put it is on this button here. This cart button should open that cart sidebar. I'm going to find that on the page. Here is that cart button. And I'm just going to add an @click here. @click equals toggle sidebar. I don't need to pass anything in, so I can just leave it as this, and Vue will automatically look through my methods and find that method. So let me see if that works. Let me go back to the page. Should be able to click on this now. And yes, it does toggle. Now the next thing I need to be able to do is close it, and I need to close it using this X here. So I'll have to go down to my template here, and here is the button that's that X that's in the corner of the header for the sidebar. So I need to add an @click on this, and I'll have to do @click. And now I want to use the function toggle sidebar, but because this is wrapped in its own component, I actually don't have access to the toggle sidebar function from here. I actually have to pass it into this component to be able to access it, and I can do that here. So I'll pass it in as toggle equals toggle sidebar. I'm using my method on the Vue.js object called toggle sidebar, passing it into the sidebar component with the name toggle. So inside my component here, it's going to be called toggle, So I'm gonna have to accept it as a prop, and I'll accept it as toggle. And that will be my function name. So now I have to rename this function and call it toggle. Let me see if this works. Go to cart, click X, and it is not working. So I do have an error here, maximum call stack size exceeded. So let me see what I did wrong in the code. So I'm importing the prop toggle. The function should be called from here. I have toggle sidebar. That is pointing to toggle sidebar here, and oh, I forgot to make this point to a Vue variable. Instead, it was just trying to use it as a string before, which was causing an error. So now it should be calling the actual toggle sidebar function. And let me see that in the code. Okay, it works just as intended now. So now on the sidebar, I want to be displaying actually dynamic items here. For right now, I only have one item hooked up, carrots, and so I'm only going to be working with this one item until the next video. So let's hook this item up. When I add items to the cart here, it should update in the cart over here. Now to do that, I need to take this cart object and pass it in to my sidebar so my sidebar has access to it. First, let me do some cleanup here. Put this on multiple lines to make it a little bit cleaner. And I'm going to pass in cart as just cart. And now I have to receive this prop in my component here. So I'm going to do it here and call it cart. And now cart that I'm getting in my component is actually that cart object. So since I'm only working with carrots for right now, I'm going to just assume that and only add the number here for carrots. So I'll use my double mustache syntax, and I have that cart variable, so I'll do cart.carrots, and that will be the number of carrots that I have. So let me go back to here, and it automatically updated. Let me add 3, and my cart now has quantity 3. So if I add, let's say add 5 more, now there's quantity 8 in my cart. So now my cart is dynamic. Of course, the total should also be updated based off of the quantity. It should be price times quantity equals the total for that item. So let me do that really quickly. This is the total number. So I'm just going to have to do this. And let's say cart.carrots times the price, which it says it's $1, but here it says $4.82. So I'm going to use this price because $1 isn't that interesting. So I'll do times $4.82, and then before that I need to put in dollars, and let's see if that works. Add to cart. Now there is an error. Let's see what the error is. Unexpected token with a dot. The reason why it's complaining is because a $sign followed by curly braces in JavaScript, whenever you put that syntax inside of the backticks that we have around this template here, it's called a template string, and it will parse whatever is inside those outer curly braces as JavaScript. So it thinks we're trying to pass in a JavaScript object, and it's complaining because cart.carrots is not a valid key. So the only thing we have to do here is actually escape the $sign. So JavaScript doesn't think we're trying to use a template string and pass in a variable. And then Vue can just parse the double curly brace syntax on its own. This should work. So let me go to cart. Now my cart opens as normal. You can see there's 0 carrots. And now if I add 2 carrots to the cart, it now gives me the correct total of 964. Now I also want to have a total of all the items in the cart. I only have one item now, but I will have more items soon. So I'm going to go ahead and add a function for that, and then we will hook up the rest of the items in the next video. So back in the code here, this is the total that I want to update. So I'm going to add this and escape that $sign that comes before the double curly braces. Now I could create a formula just in line here and say cart.carrots times the carrot price plus the second item times that price, and so on and so on. But that's not going to make a lot of sense, and that doesn't scale for multiple items. So what I'm going to do here is actually add a computed object. And if you remember, computed watches the changes in variables and will update the result. So I'll call this computed function cart total. And on my cart up here, right now I have just the number of each item. So for right now, I'm just going to hard code the price down here. So I'm going to return cart.carrots times the price, which is $4.82. And now I can take this computed variable that I created and put it in here. And now the cart total, that amount should be updated every single time. Let's see if this works. Add to cart, open my cart, and there is a bug because it's not opening. I'm stepping through trying to figure out why the cart total isn't working, and it is because I have accessed it incorrectly. So cart.carrots has to be accessed. This is inside of JavaScript, so I need to access it on the this context in my component. So I have to access it on this.cart.carrots, and that should come up with my number times that number. So let me go back to my page. And now it opens, and if I add items, I can see it's $24.10. Of course, this isn't that pretty. Sometimes it rounds it to 1, or sometimes there's only 1 decimal, and sometimes there's like 10 here. So let's just round this really quick using something built in JavaScript, so we just get 2 decimals. I'm going to wrap this here, .to fixed, and then the number 2, and let's go back to the browser. I'm going to open up the cart, add a few items, and now it's at 2 decimals exactly. Always 2. Okay. I'm going to leave it there in this video. Again, please try out implementing these features on your own from the example code. You should be able to check out the starter branch called homepage 1 from the repository and start exactly where I did at the beginning of this video. In the next video, we will cover adding all of the rest of the items to the cart by importing them into our JavaScript so we can use loops to make our code more efficient and not have to hard code everything. In this video, we are going to pull in dynamic content to populate our page, and that will be from this food.json file. So this actually has a list of objects of all different kinds of groceries that we are going to display in our app. It has some information like the names, as well as the price, and then even if we want to add a filter to sort by the type. So how can we pull this into our application? Actually, we are going to use Lifecycle Hooks in Vue JS for this. If we come to our main Vue application here, below methods, I am going to add a mounted hook, just like we had before. And inside of here, I am going to fetch this JSON data, and that's going to be an asynchronous call. So I first need to fetch this from the file name, which is food.json, and I'm going to call this the response. And then I need to call the JSON method on that response, which I'll put on this line, and that will be data. And actually I need to add await to these calls. So res.json, I can call that method. I'm going to await this as well. And then because I'm using await, I need to add async to this mounted method. So now I've created the mounted lifecycle hook. I get my data, which is the array of all of the food objects. And now that I have my data, I am going to set it on state here. So instead of inventory here, I'm going to replace inventory, just get rid of all this dummy data that I have right now, set it as an empty array. This will definitely break my application right now, but it's okay because it's a step toward fixing it. So now I'm going to set this dot inventory equal to data. Let's see if that even works. And I'm going to come to my view here. I can see my root, and I can see that the inventory in my root element here, that I have all 15 items. Good, so I know my data is working now. The next two things I need to do are display that data on this page here. And so these are just 3 recommended items. Actually, all of the products will display on this page. So for the home page, I'm just going to display the first 3 and slice that list as I loop over it. So now that I have inventory, I'm actually going to come up here to my main container. And I'm going to come to the recommended section and fold all of these cards and get rid of the last 2 because I'm only going to need 1 for my loop. And now with this initial card, I'm going to turn it into a v-for loop and loop over each item in that inventory array. So equals product in inventory. Let me just see what this looks like really quick. And yes, it tries to loop through every single item in the whole inventory. So I'm going to slice it at 3 items now. And I can do this because inside of my Vue directive, I can put valid JavaScript. So I'm going to do .slice from 0 to 3. And now I'll go back to my page. And you can see I only have 3 items now. Of course, it is only displaying caret because that's all still hard-coded. So let me put some dynamic content in here. And first with the name, I'm going to put product.name. And then I believe it's product.type. Yes. So here I'll put product.type. And for the price, now I do have prices in 2 different currencies. I'm just going to use US dollars for right now. So I need to access price.usd. And so here I'm going to go ahead and escape this and then do product.price.usd. And actually, this is just an HTML template. This isn't inside of a JavaScript template string, so I don't need to escape that at all. And that should be all of the dynamic content that we need for right now. Let's actually go ahead and update the icon as well. So that would be product.icon. Let me make sure that's the right one. Yes, .icon. Okay, so let me go to the page. Okay, so the icon's not working, but all the other data is displaying quite nicely. So now we want to add functionality so that the quantity properly updates and we can add it to the cart. Of course, right now, all of these elements have the same V model, so that's why they are mirroring each other. So let's change that. Now I'm going to go to the V model here, which is inventory.carrots, but I need the inventory of the correct item instead of just hard-coding carrots here. So because these numbers are in order, or because this is an ordered list, I'm going to come to my loop and get the index. Of course, I could use the ID as well, but I'll just use the index in the loop here. And actually, I almost forgot. I also need to add a key here since I am looping. So let me add that key. And I'm going to come down here, and in inventory, I'm going to pass in that index. And then I'm going to add a new attribute called quantity. And so this should model to an attribute called quantity, which is not currently on the objects, but that's okay. I'll just leave it off. And this should just add the quantity key to the object as needed. So let's see if this works. Let me go back over here. I'm going to add one here. You can see they're not all mirrored for each other anymore. I'm going to add it to cart, and let me see how this represents in my Vue data here. I can come to inventory, and I can see quantity of 1. Whatever number I put, this number mirrors it. But now I need a way to add this to the cart. So let me set up the cart then. And here at this add to cart function, I do need to change it because I need to pass in, instead of a string, the dynamic name of the item. So I can do product.name. And actually here, I didn't think of this, but instead of inventory and getting the inventory at index I already really have that in this loop. That's what the product variable is. So I'm just going to replace that, and that should work just fine. Now, of course, I don't really need this index anymore because for the key, I can use the ID of the product. So let me just use that, product.id, and that should work okay. And then this should also mirror for object 2. Let me see if that does. Yes, and the quantity is mirrored. Okay, now for the cart, I'm passing in the product name as add to cart. Let's take a look at the add to cart function. We are passing in the type here, and then saying this.cart.type. So it will be like this.cart.radishes plus equals whatever the amount is at this .inventory. So we do need to do one more thing here. We could either search and find the item by name in the inventory, or the easier thing to do would be to pass in the index of that item. So that's what we're going to do. And while I'm changing this, instead of type now, I think it makes more sense to call it name, because it is the name of the item. And we are using type for the type of item like vegetable or fruit, not the name anymore. So now to access it in inventory, I want to do index and then dot quantity. And that should work, but we have to actually pass in the index here. And up here, we're actually going to be passing in the index actually. So I'm going to take the index here and now add to cart. Okay. So we're getting not a number for these values. So I actually want to see what we are passing in, or what gets passed in to the function. And so to debug the function quickly, I am just going to console.log name and index. Now back in the code. So the arguments are getting passed into the function just fine. So stepping back through this, I can see that my problem here is that I am doing a plus equals on cart, or this.cart.name, when there is no value for that name in the cart yet. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my dummy data in the cart. And here I'm just going to put a simple check. So if not this.cart name, then I'm going to set this.cart name and equal to 0. And now this statement should work. Okay, let me try again. So here, I'm going to do 2, and this should update. Let's see. Okay, yes. It's just taking a minute for some reason, but it shows the correct number of each in the cart. No more, not a number. Now that it shows it on the cart over here, I want to show it in the sidebar. Right now, the sidebar is hooked up to only look for carrots. So let's make the sidebar dynamic now. So if you remember, the sidebar here is in this template. So it's part of the custom sidebar component that we made. And we are already passing the cart in here. Now we actually need more information because the cart is only showing us the number of items in the cart. But we also want more information from those items, such as the price. So I'm going to come up here to my sidebar, and after cart, I'm going to be passing in the inventory as well as inventory. And now I can receive that as a prop in my component. So basically we have to loop through all of the items in the cart and display their information now. And we have a table here, so we have all of the headers for the table, and then we can loop through these rows and basically make as many rows as we want. So I'm going to go ahead and add a v4 here to loop through each item in the cart. And here I do need to use the index. I will be using that as a key here. Okay, and now these are being looped through in the sidebar. So if I come to the sidebar, I should see no items right now. Of course, the total needs to be fixed. And now I can see I have this item, and now I have another item. So now I need to get rid of these hard-coded names. Now to do that, I'm going to go ahead and grab the key for these items in the cart. And actually, because cart is an object, this index is actually going to be a key, and then the third one is index, or just I. So now I have access to the item name, which is the key, the item quantity, which I will change this to the name quantity. And here I can change this to that key, and we should see the names of all of the items in our cart. Let's test this out. Let me add different items to the cart. Should see radishes and artichokes. And in the cart, we do indeed see radishes and artichokes. Now let's display the quantity. So here we can get rid of this and say just quantity, which we're pulling off of the object in the cart. Of course, we already know that should work. Let me add an item here. And quantity works. Now price is a little bit trickier because we don't have the price stored on the cart. We actually have to search through inventory for the price. So we're going to make a helper method for that. First, let me escape this. And then we're going to call getPrice. pass in the name of the item, which is the key, and we will find the price and return it based off of the name. So after computed here, I'm going to add methods for this. Just a regular methods object, and add that get price. And basically we can access this .inventory and do a .find. So we want to find one of the inventory items. So I'll call each item product in the function that I pass in. And .find will loop through all products in the inventory and try to find whatever item I want. So I want the item where the product name is equal to the name that I'm passing into the function. And when I find that product, I'm going to set it equal to a variable here. It's kind of confusing if I call it product again, so maybe I'll just call this one P instead. There we go. And now for the return function, now that I have the product saved in this variable, I can do product, and it should be .price.usd again. So .price.usd. And that should return the price of the item. And let's see if that works. So let me get one here and view the cart. And I can indeed see the price. Let me try that for artichokes too. And I can see the price and quantities of the item correctly. Now let me update the function for total. And so total here needs to be dynamic based off of the whole cart really. So to do this, I'm actually going to use a helper method. So what I'm going to do is take this out of computed and instead use it as a method. So since it's not computed, it's a method, I'm going to call it a verb, so calculate total. And I'm going to go ahead and rename the method call down here. Of course, I'll actually be calling that as a function now. And I won't be needing this line of code anymore. So now we basically need to calculate the total based off of the quantity in the cart, and then we have to look up the price in the inventory. Fortunately, we already have a method to be able to look up the price, so we're going to just use that. And the easiest way to do this is actually to do object.values. And so object.values can give me an easy array of values out of an object. And because cart is an object, I'm not going to loop through it directly. I'm just going to grab all of the values out. So I will pass in cart, and now I have an array of all of the values here, which are the quantities that I want. So out of that array, I'm going to reduce it. Now the reduce function is just a built-in JavaScript function where I save an accumulator. Some people like to call it a sum. I'll call it an accumulator because that's what it uses on MDN. And basically I'm calculating a sum on each iteration through the loop. I also have my current item that's being looped through, and then I can also get the index of that item in the function. And basically what I want to do is return the accumulator, sum, total, whatever you want to call it, plus the current item or the current value, because I'm looping through all of the values on the cart here. And I need the value times the price. So I'm going to have to call this.getPrice, and then I need to pass in the name of the item that I want to get the price for. So the easiest way to do that is to also make an array of names. So I'm going to do that by using this time object.keys, and I will do this.cart, get all of the keys this time off of cart. And actually I forgot to put this here. And so I will do the current value times this.getPrice. And now that I have the names here, I'm just going to look up by the index. So I can pass in names index to the this.getPrice function, and that should work. For the function, I forgot to put an arrow here. And now for the total variable, I just stored it in a variable to explicitly name it. All I need to do now is return the total. Now this function works. There might be a more optimized way to do this. This is just to demonstrate how to calculate a total using a Vue.js method for this application. And it's basically just using regular JavaScript. So let me add items to the cart here. And of course this total we haven't done yet, but we do have 2 radishes and the total says $2. So let's add some artichokes. And now we have a total of $30.32. As you can see, those aren't the correct values. What I believe is happening is because objects are unordered and arrays are ordered, that the names and the object.values, they aren't being listed in the array in the same order. So I'm going to have to, instead of making 2 separate arrays here, I'm going to get rid of this one. And here I will just have to change this to entries. And now my current value here will basically be an array that will be the key and the value, each time looping through this larger array. So for the value now, I will have to access it at the first index, and instead of names here, I can access the name at the current item at the 0th index. That all looks good. The last thing I'm going to do is add an initial value here. And this means that the accumulator will start at 0. And also if there are no items in this array, which there aren't any to start, that means the number will just be 0 total. And for here, for the total, actually I'm going to use that method again that we used before, which was toFixed, so I could do it to 2 decimals, which is what I want in my cart. Let me see if this works. And this is exactly what I want here. So let me add items. Yes, and the price is exactly right. 1 artichoke, and the price still works there. Now, what about the total here? That should be easy enough to do with our getPrice method. So let's go down to the total. Right now it's hard-coded as carrots, which doesn't exist. So now I can do just the quantity, which is the quantity of the item in the cart. And then I'll call the getPrice method, and I'm going to pass in the key, which is the name of the item. And so that should multiply by the total. Let's see if that works. Add an item and check out the cart. And we do indeed see the total here. Now it still says no items in cart. Let's go ahead and fix that. So this should only show if in fact there are no items. And so I'm going to add a VIF here. And just to speed this up, we're going to do object.keys and then check the cart object. So if there are no keys on the cart object, that will be 0, which is a falsy value. And let's see if that works. Let's go down here to radishes, add 1 in the cart. We are still seeing this no items in cart. So I believe I have to do length here. And let's see if that works. Okay, that does work, but I have it backwards. So I basically need to do if not, because if the length is 0, I want to show this. And if it's not 0, then I don't want to show this no items in cart because there will be items in the cart. So let's see if that works. Let's first go here. It does show no items in cart. And now let me go here. And now it changes to the item in the cart. And all of the totals are shown correctly. And the quantities updated and all of that stuff. The only other thing I want to do is provide full CRUD operations, and this delete does not work. So I'm going to hook up the delete now. So you can see the delete is here on this button for remove. And so I'm going to add a function here. And actually this function will have to be not inside of this component, but inside of the parent component, which is my main Vue application in this case. So I'm going to do a click. So when this button is clicked, I'm going to say remove item to remove the item from the cart. And then I need to pass in the name of the item, which is the key. Now this remove item is going to have to be a function passed in as a prop here, because I can't mutate props, so I couldn't change the inventory or the cart actually directly from this component. I have to change it from the parent component where it originates. So I'll take a remove item function. Let me go ahead and pass that in. Remove item equals remove item. And now I have to create that function here as one of these methods. So let me add that, remove item. This will take in the item name, and I am going to remove it from the cart basically. So I can just remove JavaScript delete this.cart name. Let's see if that works. Let me add some vegetables to my cart, and now I will remove them, and it does not remove. Let's see if I'm getting an error. Remove item is not a function, so let's see why it's not considered a function. I do have it in methods here, remove item. Let's go here. This is remove item that I'm passing into my sidebar. I am also accepting it as a prop in the sidebar here. Let me get rid of computed. So it's not recognizing this as a function. So what I'm going to do is rename it in the child component. Now this is a workaround only for the CDN. You won't have this problem if you are using Vue JS from NPM. But I'm just renaming the function in app.component here. There we go. And of course I need to pass it in as the name remove. So I basically gave it a different name for the child component and for the parent component. And let's see if it recognizes this as a function now. I will come here and I can remove it from the cart. Awesome. Of course, when I add things to the cart, I do want the number to clear here. So let me take care of that really quickly. In add to cart here, just really quickly, I'm going to set this to 0. Let's see if that works. And back to 0, and it is in the cart now. Awesome. The only other thing is that the cart does show 0 items even when there are items in it. That's because the number is not dynamic. So let me change that really quickly. Here, inside of the parentheses, I'm going to change this to be dynamic. And I'm just going to call the variable total quantity. Okay, and now I need to make this variable. So what I'm going to do is create a computed object here. And I'm going to say total quantity is basically the sum of all of the quantities in the cart. And to do this, I'm going to use another reduce method. I'm going to say object.values, pass in this.cart, and then I will reduce those to sum up all of the numbers. So I have my accumulator and my current value. And then all I need to do is add the accumulator and current value together. Of course, I'll set a default of 0 here as a starting point or initial value. And I'm just going to return this directly this time. Let me see if that worked. Right now it says 0, but let me add items. Now it's 3. Let me add one more, and now it's 4. So the quantity is working. If I remove 1, now it's just 1. So that is a dynamic value now. And that is basically it for the home page here. In the next video, we are going to move the Vue.js code outside of the app.html file so we can see how it can work in multiple different pages, and also some of the struggles that we might run into trying to build a multi-page site via the Vue CDN and trying to do things like share data across pages and stuff like that. If you want to see the starter code for this video, make sure you check out the branch in the repo called homepage number 2 or homepage 2. Hi everyone, welcome back. First, I want to review what we did in the last video. We connected the cart slide out draw menu on the right here and made that fully functional, and then we added an actual loop as well as functionality to be able to add items to our cart here. Now this is only one page, of course. So we also have the products page here. So if I go to products page, you can see the URL changes to go to the products.html page. Now, if I look at this in my code, so let me open up the source and this app.html file again. You can see here is the header with all of the links on it. I'm going to fold that real quick, and then you can see the different sections of the page, including that sidebar that slides out that we actually want on every page, but now it's kind of just hard-coded into this home page. I can also go to views here, so you can see in the header actually, so when I click on products, it goes to views/products.html. So it's actually navigating me to this products.html page. And if you look at the header here, here's the whole page, including a completely separate div with ID of app, where we would have to inject our Vue.js code. You can see we already did that on this page because our Vue.js is in the script down here. And we are rendering it or mounting it inside of that div. But if I go to products, we have no JavaScript, no interaction. Everything is hard-coded. We also have a duplicate header. So this is exactly the same thing as the header on this page. It's just copy-pasted into the HTML on this page. Of course, we don't want to do that everywhere. We don't want to have a copy-pasted header for all of our different pages. Not only that, we would have to copy-paste the whole cart sidebar as well. So to make this code reusable here, we need to extract these things into other files. Now, this is not easy to do for plain HTML, but we can use a Vue component like we did before with the sidebar. So I'm actually going to extract all of this out into a separate JavaScript file. And now import this file into my HTML. And you can see my page is still working. My cart is still fully functional. And what this allows me to do is now take this file, this JavaScript file that I have separated, and import it also into my products.html file. And I'm actually going to grab both of these script tags so I can also have my view. And I'm going to put them at the bottom here, except I'm going to have to go up a directory here because my app.js file lives outside of my views, right? Here's products, and I need to get up one folder to app, so I have to do ... And that should reference the correct app.js file. Let me see if that's working. If I go to products, and you can see the cart page doesn't open, but that's because I have not hooked up the cart button yet. So I will have to copy this over from the app.html file for right now. So if I go here, I can just take the same code, and now it should reference that same toggle sidebar function and also display the total quantity correctly as well, because I am importing the same Vue JS code in the script tag here. Now you can see that the cart variable displays just fine on the products page, but if I click here, of course the cart doesn't open because the cart is only available on this page. I only have the sidebar component here. And the sidebar component, you know, is actually a custom component that we made in Vue JS. So we can put that on any page where we import the Vue JS. So I'm just going to put it here below this main tag. And with all the same variables, those should be fine because we're sharing the same Vue JS script. Let me save that. Now you can see I can toggle the cart here. And all of this is pretty much the same thing that we did on the home page down here where we looped through the different types of foods. We would do the same thing over here on the products page. Loop through them, hook up each individual number, then hook up the add to cart button so that it would actually display in the cart over here. Now, if I add items here, let me add a couple to cart. You can see I have 3 in my cart here. If I go to products, you can see the page refreshed, and now there are no items in my cart. So though there is some functionality to this application so far, there are a few problems that we have run into with just using a CDN to import Vue.js. And that is, how do we share data across pages and across page refreshes? So here at the home page, when I add something to the cart here, it leaves the cart as soon as the page refreshes. So as soon as I navigate to another page, it's gone. Now, how would I fix that problem? So generally, in front-end applications, we would want to do something like persist our data or save our data somewhere. One easy way to do that in the browser, one very common way, is to go here in application, and you can see there's different types of storage. This is in-browser storage, and local storage will persist even if the page is refreshed. So we can actually save the data, like our cart data, into local storage here, and then if we refresh or anything, we will just automatically try to pull anything that's saved from local storage. For the way our application is set up right now, that would be every time we navigate to a new page, we would have to check local storage, see if there's anything in there, and then pull it into our application. It's kind of a workaround for our setup. So one way to fix this would actually be to create a single page application with Vue, where the front end would actually do the routing instead of our server. In this case, we're just using a live server in VS Code, but our server is serving up pages every time we go to a new URL here, and that's why it has to refresh because it's coming from the server. Whereas if we make a single page application, there will be no page refreshes. We will go seamlessly from page to page because our front end, in other words Vue JS, will be routing us to different pages. The second problem, as you can see, is sharing code. We do have some duplicate code across pages. Of course, we are reusing the same sidebar template here, this sidebar template. We just registered it as a Vue template, a Vue component called sidebar, and we can use that on any page now. We could do the same thing with header as well, and we would probably do that if we were going to build an application using the CDN. We could extract this into a template as well. And then we would have to do the same thing for the past orders page. Of course, none of this is dynamic or set up yet. But the easiest thing to do is actually to set up our project with something called the Vue CLI. As our codebase grows, it will be very difficult to manage many different components if we are managing them just importing different files into all of our different HTML files. But there is a much easier way, and that is with the Vue CLI. This is why it was created. The Vue CLI basically gives us one command, Vue create, and our project name, and then it creates a whole project for us. It walks us through a setup wizard, asks us what features we want, and then we'll create all of the files, folders, and build tools necessary for a robust front-end single-page application. So in the next video, we are going to take all of our code currently in HTML files and our JavaScript file and convert it to a Vue CLI application. I'll see you in the next video. Let's get started with the Vue CLI. I am at cli.vuejs.org, and I'm just going to click Getting Started. And if I go over to the side, click on Installation, I can see that it is prompting me to globally install this Vue CLI package at vue/CLI, so that from my command line or terminal, I will be able to use a Vue command to create projects. Now you might see some places on the internet that install a different package without the @ and / just vue-CLI or something like that. That is an older version of the package. Vue basically has its own namespace, and then each one of its packages are after the /. So to install Vue CLI, you can copy this command here. I'm going to go to my terminal. And now I have the Vue CLI installed. I can check and make sure that it's installed by checking the version. Right now I have version 4.5.11. And now I want to use it to create an actual Vue project. And I can do this through the Vue create command, and then give it the name of the project that I'm going to create. If you want to see the documentation for this command, you can come over here under Basics to Creating a Project and read about how Vue Create works here. I'm going to go ahead and say Vue Create Product and Cart as the name of my project, and click Enter. Now, if you've used some tools like Create React App, you will notice that here it's a little bit different. It doesn't just bootstrap the whole project for you right away. You actually get to pick your own options and the packages that you want to install and use. These top 4 options here are actually custom options that I have created myself. Vue gives us these 2 defaults right now. One is for version 2 of Vue, and one is for version 3. And then it also gives us the option at the bottom to manually select features. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just to show you how it works. So I basically use the arrow keys to go down, and then I can click Enter when I want to select something. Now you'll notice that this list here is multi-select. And if I press spacebar, I can select or deselect an item. Of course, I want to choose my Vue version because I want to use version 3. I definitely need to have Babel set up for me for transpiling my Vue code. I'm going to need routing in this application. I'm also going to use state management with Vuex, but I'm going to add that later to show you how to add a Vue CLI package after you've already set up your application. CSS preprocessors are things like SASS. If you think you will want to use SASS in the future, it's a good idea to go ahead and set it up now. I believe this also works with less and stylus as well. And then I definitely want linting and formatting in this project, and I can optionally select testing if I want, but I'm not going to do that this time. So once I'm ready, I'm going to hit enter. It takes me to the next step. I can choose the version of Vue.js, arrow down, and I'm going to choose version 3. Use history mode for the router. This is a pretty small coding change, but it's usually what you want in a project. This basically only affects the URL of your project from a user point of view. So if you want your routes to be after a hashtag, it will use hash router. If you want your routes to be after just a normal / like any website you would navigate to in your browser, then you can just go ahead and use history router. And I'm going to use history router. Now it's asking me to pick a linter and formatter. So I'm going to go ahead and pick ESLint plus the standard config that it has for Vue.js. Click enter. I'll lint files when they're saved. I'm going to choose to put my configuration in the package.json this time, just so I don't have a bunch of extra config files. Usually when you have larger projects, you want dedicated config files so it's not cluttering up your package.json. Do I want to save this as a preset? No, I do not this time. But if you remember at the beginning of this walkthrough, the 4 top options, those were presets that I had saved in the past. But here I'm just going to say no. Here it's basically setting up my whole project with the file structure and everything. And it's also running an npm install. You can see it successfully created my project. If I list the folders inside now, I have this new folder that was created for me by Vue.js called Product and Cart. I'm going to go into that folder, and you can see when Vue spun up the project for me, it also initialized a Git repository for me and saved all of the changes that it did initially as a commit. So let me open this up in VS Code. And I have my complete project created for me by Vue. In the next video, we will look through all of these folders and files and give you a little bit of a tour of how your Vue project is laid out. Let's look at all of these files and folders that Vue spun up for us. Now looking at this looks pretty much like the last project that we worked on with static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And that was by design to give you the same style of coding and file structure that you would be using in a real Vue application. This, however, is much nicer. Starting with the Vue CLI gives us a lot more features out of the box though. We can see in the package.json, we have 3 scripts here by default. There would be more if you choose to install the testing packages as well. Because we installed a linter, the Vue CLI gives us this lint command, and then it also gives us our main 2 commands for the Vue application. For development locally, it gives us this serve command, which basically calls this package, Vue CLI service, that's from Vue.js, gives it the serve command, and it will run a development server for us. So there's no more of the old complicated server setup that we had in the last version of this, in the last application. The build command is really for when we want to host our project live. This will generate production-ready files for you, like your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, so you can deploy them and have a live website somewhere. We're just going to be talking about this command in this video. And to give you an idea of what it does, let's go ahead and run it. I can use npm to run the command, so npm run serve. And now my app is running at port 8080. If I highlight something in the terminal, it automatically copies. I'm going to come to my browser, open a new tab, and I can see it gives me an app already set up out of the box. And because we chose to install a router as well, it installed the default Vue router, which is also called Vue router. And you can see I can go to different page routes. Now this isn't the same as our last application because there's no page refresh in between page routes. These are not HTML links. This is just a JavaScript router rendering, hiding, or showing different pages of this application. You'll also notice from the home page, it's just port 8080. When we go to the About page, it adds /about. If we look in the public folder here, you can see here's our HTML page, and we have a div of ID app, and this is where our app will be injected. But also when our application is built, under the hood, this Vue CLI service command is running Webpack and bundling all of our files together, and also handling running Babel to transpile our files. And so all of the JavaScript and everything will be injected as script tags as well here. But we generally don't have to worry about this index.html file in a Vue project, because again, most of what we will be doing is in the source folder right here. So we have a main.js file that is always created for us. So this is basically the same thing that we did in the previous application. If you do see Vue 2 code, this file will look a little bit different, but you'll still be able to see the different parts. Just the organization and syntax is a little bit different. Just like before, we have to pass in a root component. We chain on any packages that we want to use, in this case the router, and then we mount that to the DOM, so inside of the div with ID of app. And you could also rewrite this as const app, and then app.useRouter, and then app.mount. That's a bit easier to parse through as you add more packages. Now, when we're looking at this initial page, where does all of this come from? Let's take a look. So we have our main component app, but you'll notice in app there's no real content here. All it is a div. This is basically the top navigation. Now, where did this router link come from? This is a custom component actually. And if you look in our main.js, when we use app.useRouter, we are actually given some components like router link as well as router view. Now, router link is actually a substitution for using the anchor tag to link to another page, except router link is made by Vue Router specifically for single page application routing, where our JavaScript handles the routing instead of linking to a separate HTML page. Of course, we only have one HTML page, and all of our static content is injected into that one page, and the router handles intercepting the route, making it appear as though you've navigated to another page, while really it's just showing and hiding different elements on the DOM. So we have these two router links, and then what does router view do? So router view is actually our page content. And our router will handle replacing this router view tag with whatever component we tell it to in our routes file that we are about to look at. So router view is just a temporary placeholder for whatever we put on the page. And you'll see as we navigate to different pages, those home and about links at the top of this file, those will stay no matter what page we navigate to, but all of the content below it will change because those are the components getting injected into this router view area here. If we look into our router index.js file here, we can see that we are using the Vue Router API to create a router. And when we create a router here, we are passing in two things. So the routes, which is an array of all our routes that we have in the application, and then history mode. It set this up for us because we chose to use history mode, and Vue is handling all of that under the hood. But let's talk about the routes here. So we have the default home route, which is this page, and then we also have the about page, which is found at this route. Now, you don't have to worry about code splitting and lazy loading and all of that other stuff. Those are more advanced routing concepts. So I'm going to get rid of that line and then just import the about component just like the home component. Now you basically define routes here, and instead of importing the components that you want to show on a page into your app.vue, you just use a router view tag here, and then you import any of your Vue components like home and about into this file. You define the path where that component can be found at, the name of that component. Now the name is mostly used for routing, and then you tell it which component will be found at that path. So at the home path, we're going to find the home component. Now, where is the home component? We can see that it is in views/home. So let's go in here, and we can see that this is the component. It has an image, which is the Vue logo on top, and then it also imports another component into itself. Now, this component is not in the views folder, it's in the components directory. Now, why is it in the components directory instead of just one folder for all Vue files? Basically, in front-end applications, files are usually split up between views or pages. So basically, anything in this views folder will be connected to the router. So they will have their own routes. They'll be their own pages. Anything in the components folder are things that are imported into other components. They're meant to be parts of pages or reusable components that you use throughout your application. Basically, anything in the views folder is connected to the router, and if it's not connected to the router and just imported into another component, then put it in the components folder. And you'll see at the home route, there's a Vue image at the top, and then there are all of these links here. And that's exactly what we see in the home route. Now, if we go to the About page, it's not importing any other components or doing anything fancy. There's only this h1, so a header with that text, which is what we see when we go to the About page. Assets, of course, are a place for usually CSS, images, anything like that to live. Sometimes you will see other folders created here in Vue projects, but these are the basic ones. The only one that we are going to add later is the store folder, and we'll talk about that in a few videos. In the next video, we are going to start transferring our content over from our old static application into our Vue application. Let's start moving things over one by one, starting with the home page. I'm going to go over to my original code here, into source, and then go into my app.html here. The first thing that I need to grab is this header. Now I do have some JavaScript functionality in here, and I'll handle hooking that up in a minute. But let me just copy paste for right now and move this over to a new file. Now I'm going to need it on this home page here, but since this header is actually my app-wide navigation, I am actually going to want to replace the navigation here so that I can use this and see this on any page. And for right now, I'm going to get rid of these. Now there's a bit of cleanup that I need to do here because these anchor tags need to be changed to the Vue router link tags. And now I need an actual route. So instead of pointing to an HTML file, I am going to give it a route that will be in my router here, linked to a component. So I have this products.html here. What I'm going to do is change that to /products. Of course, this can't be an href. This will be 2. Since that's expected by the router link. Also, I need to change this from href to 2. And I can just call this route past orders, get rid of the .html. And here as well, change this to 2. And this should just be a /. I'm not going to worry about this yet. This last router link at the bottom. I'm going to just comment that out for right now. And basically, I need to create these 3 components that are linked to the routes. Now, I already have the home route here. That is linked to the home component. I'm actually going to get rid of about, and I'm going to change this to products. I'm going to have to create a new component. And now let me delete about from here. And let me create a new file. I'll call this products.vue. Now this is a little bit different. Instead of calling this just a regular JavaScript file with the extension JS, Vue has a custom file extension which is .vue. All of these .vue files are parsed by the Vue and Webpack setup that the Vue CLI sets up for us. So using these .vue files, we can put our HTML template, our JavaScript, and even our CSS all in the same file. That gets parsed and all put together and bundled by the tools that Vue CLI sets up for us. Now I have a new file. I'm just going to create a template in here. And I have 4 spaces. I'm going to switch to using 2 spaces for tab spacing. And I'm just going to put h1 products for right now. All right, before we get too far, let's see how this looks. And we do have a products page and a home page now, but of course this is completely unstyled. Let's pause here and start to bring over some of the styles in the next video. Let's start to move our styles over. Now our styles are going to live inside of this assets folder, and I can go ahead and create a folder inside of there called styles. Now how do I use styles in my project? If you come to this app component here, you will notice that there is a style tag at the bottom of the component. And these are what is providing custom styles for the application. If I look in my browser, this is what is styling and centering the elements. If I get rid of these styles, this is what it looks like without any of those custom styles. In any Vue component, you can add styles directly inside of that component. So if I wanted to do something like change all h1 tags to the color of blue, and you'll notice this is just plain CSS here that you can write inside of these Vue files. Now if I go here, you can see that this is an h1 tag and it is changed to being blue. Also on the products tag, that is blue as well, because that is another h1. Now, if I look at this though, those h1 elements are nowhere to be found in this component. Those are actually in other components, but by default, the style tag globally affects anything in the application. So if I put a style tag here, even though it's in the app.vue file, anywhere in my application that has an h1 tag can be affected by this. Now, this is generally not good practice, because if you want to globally change a style, you should put that in a separate style sheet, so in some other .css file. Here, if I'm putting styles inside of my app.vue file, generally what I intend to do is only let it affect the app.vue file. So it won't change styles in any other component, right? It'll only affect whatever is in my template in this file. And that's why I use the scope keyword here now. Now that I've added the scope keyword, so you can see that the text changed back to black, because now that I've scoped this, it is only affecting styles within this Vue component, not in other components throughout the application. Now, if I wanted to add an external style sheet, let me just go ahead and create a temporary one here. I'll call this main.css, and let me paste in my last style, and I'll change the color. This will not affect my application yet because I have to import the CSS file. Now, instead of importing this into one of my HTML files, what Vue does is allow me to import it directly into my JavaScript. So generally that would be this main.js file. What I can do is import from assets, styles, and then that main.css. And the Vue CLI set up Webpack for me in such a way that I can import styles directly into my JavaScript, and it is all handled by the tooling. So now if I go back to my browser, it's a little bit darker, but you can tell that this is purple now because I am importing it globally into my project from this main.css file. Those are the basics of how you import styles into an application. Now, if I come back to my original static application with our HTML files that we were using, if I come to styles here, you can see that these aren't just CSS files, they are SASS files for the most part. So how do I get these into my project if they aren't standard CSS files? So Vue also has built-in ways of handling this. Let me copy these styles, and I'm going to delete this styles folder here, and I'm going to paste. So I pasted in this styles folder from my other project, and now if I look in this folder, there is one file called style.scss, which is a SASS file, and this imports all of the rest of the files here, all of my other SASS files. Now it is this file that I really want to import into my project to get all of my styles. I'm going to comment this out, and now I'll import that SASS file directly from assets/styles/style.scss. I'll save that. And now you can see that it is giving me an error saying can't resolve SASS loader. So it's trying to load those SASS files, but since they aren't regular CSS, we have to add another module to be able to import those files. And that is, like it says, SASS loader. If we look in the Vue CLI documentation and go to working with CSS under development, we can see that it has this section on preprocessors. Now, as it mentions, we can select our preprocessor when we're creating the project, meaning when we ran that first Vue create project name, that command would take us through setting up SASS automatically. Now, since we did not choose SASS back then when we were setting it up, there are ways of adding these packages, which you can do through this command, npm install, and then installing the SASS loader and also the SASS package. Now, if I scroll down a little bit, it is giving me this note about Webpack 4, which is what I'm using in Vue CLI for. I have to make sure I have a compatible version of these loaders. So I am going to go ahead and grab this npm install command where I can install SASS loader at a specific version and also SASS. And it installed those packages for me. Now I should be able to run my server once again at npm run serve. Now it is complaining that I don't have one specific CSS module because I haven't installed it in my node modules, but that is actually a good sign because that means that it is reading through the rest of my file here. It's reading through this, getting to this line and saying, hey, I can't find that file. So I'm just going to comment that out for right now. And now we have one more error here, and that is it's looking for images that it can't find right now. Let's go ahead and resolve those. And they're coming from this file. So if I go to splash.sass, now you'll notice the syntax is a little bit different here. You can basically think of it as just an indented syntax without curly braces. Either way, you can see that the attributes are the same here. So I have background image. It's looking for this image. And again, there's a background image which is looking for this grain image. So I'm going to create an images folder here, an img folder, and put those two images inside of the img folder, and then update this path. So back in my old application, they were in my public directory. I have grain and splash. I'm gonna copy those and paste them here. And I should be able to reference the relative path here. Close this file. And you can see I have the styles for my main application in here now. Let me do one more thing and get rid of this boilerplate here so I can be ready to put my own content there. So let me get out of here and go to source/views and home. I'll get rid of this image. I'll also get rid of that component. I'm just going to put home here for now and get rid of the component everywhere. Now if I go back to this page, you can see that it is ready to add my own custom content, and I can see the products page it navigates as well. One more thing I'll go ahead and do is add a past orders page to the router at this route. And all I'll have to do is basically copy the products route. This will be past orders. I can call it past orders. Past orders. Now I need to create this component. It's connected to my router, so I'm going to create it in the views folder. Call it past orders.view. And I have a shortcut snippet here. I'll show you how to use this in a second, but if I click enter, it just created the template tag for me. And I'm going to put in each one in here that says past orders. And now I have this page working. So all 3 pages are there. In the next video, I'll be putting content on these pages and then hooking them up to JavaScript to be functional. Now let's work on putting actual content on this home page. I'm in the original application now. Let me go to source. Inside of views here, I have my pages. Actually, the main page is still in app.html. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these 2 container elements here, the div and the main container, copy those, go over to my new code, my Vue CLI project, and here I can come to my home page and just paste that in here. All right. Now take this, adjust the indentation, get rid of that old word, and now I have my splash container and also my main container. And nothing is showing up on the page. So if I look in the DevTools, it says cannot read property slice of undefined. And I can search for where that is being used, and inventory.slice. So of course it is broken right now because I don't have any inventory. So let me grab that from my original code base. If I go here, I can see in food.json. This file is really where I have my inventory items. So I'm going to copy this file, go over here, and inside of source, I'm just going to paste that file. And now I need to import this into my Vue JS. So if I want this right now in my home component, I need to import it at the bottom here. So let me import my data. So import food from, go up a directory, food.json. Let's set it equal to a data variable. So data, and then I can return, and then I can set inventory equal to food. Okay, let's try this out. And now we see the banner displays just fine, and we can see our recommended products section at the bottom, which is already displaying real data because we already set this up, and this is basically the same logic as with the other app, but we've only rewritten this in a component structure. Now let's pull in the other pages really quick. So we have past orders and also products. Let's go to products, and if I go to the products page, I can just grab this main section here, go back over to my code, and then paste that in. Now this page should work as it is, because if I look at all of the code here, we never made that dynamic. So that's something that we will have to change later, but this is all hard-coded. Let me grab the past orders page real quick, and then we can take a look at it in the browser. So if I go to past orders, let me fold this main section. I'm gonna copy this and go over here to my code, paste that. And now let's take a look at these pages. Okay, so our past orders page has an error, and it's complaining that this I tag, which was used for icons generally, that it doesn't have a closing tag, meaning it's not explicitly self-closing, and I'm not explicitly closing it either. Like this TD tag here has a closing TD tag there. So I will have to fix that. That's just how Vue templates work. So let me search for I, and seems like it's only in 2 places, which is good. All I have to do to fix that is either I could do a closing tag. Things like IMG and I and certain tags don't really have closing tags. So all I have to do is make them self-closing, since you're never going to nest anything inside of this tag in general. So I'm just adding the / at the end, and I will do that with this I as well. And that fixed my error. And now here's the products page and the past orders page as well. This is kind of a table view of previous orders. Now what about the sidebar? Let's add that logic back in the next video. In our original application, we had this sidebar on the right to display our cart. In this video, we're going to move that over to our new Vue CLI application. So I'm in the original code base here. If I go to any of my files, I can see there is a sidebar component, which is a custom Vue component that I define in my app.js file. This sidebar component that I register, and I can basically use it globally throughout my application. Now, of course, this is just regular Vue code, so I could absolutely do the same thing in my new application. But there are other ways that I can now create reusable components. So I'm actually going to put it in my components folder instead. I'm going to copy all of that. Let me go to components. I have this old hello world component. I'm going to delete it because I don't need it anymore. And then I'm going to create a new file here and call this sidebar.vue. In here, of course, I need the template, and I'm going to paste all of that code. And this is basically all of the cart logic. Now there are a few things I will need to add. Pass in a dynamic toggle here when the button is clicked. So let me go ahead and set that up. Now the first thing I need to do is import this sidebar component into my application. And it's going to be globally available across all my pages. So I'm going to import it into my app.vue file. And I'll do it below. Actually, I'll do it at the bottom here. I'm going to put sidebar. It has to be, of course, self-closing here. And also the convention is to capitalize custom components. So you can easily see them and see they're even highlighted differently than anything that is lowercase that I've pulled in from a library or that is just standard HTML. I'm going to get rid of my style tag here and add a script tag. And now I can import that component. So I'm going to import sidebar from .components/sidebar.vue. Now another way of writing this, and what you'll a lot of times see in Vue applications, instead here you'll see an @ sign. Now this is a shortcut, kind of a reference to the source folder. So that way, anywhere in my application, no matter how many files deep my components are, I don't have to do anything like ... // etc. I can always reference the source folder with an @ symbol. So it will be source/components/sidebar.vue. Now, any component that I import into another component, I need to register it and tell my Vue application I'm going to be using this component. And I can do that by setting a component object on this default options object in Vue. And I can set the sidebar component here. Registering it here, or including it in the list of components here, just means that I can use it up here in my template. So how this works, basically, this whole object here, it's called the options object. And any kind of JavaScript functions or data will get set on this object. I just want to point out that this is the exact same as the options object you used in custom components like this one, except the template in our .vue file is just included at the top up here inside of this template. And if we look at this main app component here, everything inside this object, all of this data, computed, methods, all of this stuff is the options object. But here we have it to be used globally. And when we create a Vue CLI application, we basically get one template and one options object per component that we use to define everything on. Now, the thing about this is that each component only knows about the JavaScript inside the options object of that component. So if I create a function here, I can only use it up here and in no other component, unless I explicitly pass it into that component to be used. Just the same way that we passed data and functions around two different components when we were building the static application. And here we're going to need to do that again because Sidebar requires certain things to be passed in. Now, if we look here, we can see that first there is a vif boolean. There's a function to toggle the sidebar when it's clicked or when the button is clicked to open or close it. There's also a cart object for what is currently inside the cart. There are all of our inventory items, and then there is a remove item function. So I'm going to copy all of these things and paste them over here. And now I need to define these properties. The first thing is vif. I need to create a show sidebar data property here. And I'm going to set this just default as true for right now so I can see the sidebar. Now I need a toggle sidebar function. Now, where does this come from? It has to come from my app component up here because I'm passing it in basically from app to the sidebar component. So here's my toggle sidebar function, and I'm just going to grab all of these functions right now. And I'll create that methods object. And I pasted in all of my methods here. Now here's another tricky part because I want to reference inventory here, but unfortunately I only have it in my home component, which I just kind of quickly put there to fix my issue of basically inventory being undefined. So I'm going to have to restructure my application so I'm not importing inventory separately into each component. So let me actually take this import and I'm going to just import inventory into my app.vue component. So I'm importing it here and then my logic here, so inventory is food, and I'm going to add that to data as well. So inventory is food. Now I need to get it to my home component, but it's not really a registered component on this page. Like Sidebar, I can easily pass elements into Sidebar as props because it's a registered component right here. But home is a little bit different because the router is dynamically putting the home component there. So how do I pass props through the router then to whatever component the router loads? What we're going to do is pass in inventory into basically any router view component. So I'm going to pass in the inventory variable, and of course I need to vbind this to make it actually look for a variable and not consider it to just be a string here. So now I'm passing in inventory, and I need to accept that in the child component. So instead of data here, I'm actually going to have to use props, just as I did before, and have a props object, or I'll just do it as an array actually, and I have to call it inventory. There are a few more broken elements that I will have to fix here that the sidebar is expecting. I have my inventory and remove item, and I really just need my cart at this point. Now, if I look in the original version, I can see the cart is just an empty object, and then things can be dynamically added to the cart. But we're going to worry about dynamically adding things in a minute. But first, I'll just set it to an empty object. So let me go to data here and set cart to an empty object. Really quick, let's go ahead and grab this computed property as well, because we will need it. So I'll come down here and put computed. And let's check this out in the browser. So it's complaining right now that it can't find this JSON file. And that's because we are importing it from the wrong place. And yay, the app is running. Products past orders. Everything seems to be working okay. However, we don't have the sidebar yet. So let me go ahead and uncomment this code here. So we have toggle sidebar and also showing the quantity and the button here. So here, I should be able to see the button that we had before in our previous application. All right, when I come here and refresh, nothing shows up. So we have some kind of an issue. It says uncaught type error. Can't find path of undefined. So the path, this is referring to the router. So I think it's giving us an error in the router link because we are not properly using the router link. So let me just change this to a div. We basically aren't telling it to route anywhere. We are just using it as a clickable element. So we might as well be using something else. And now it is working, except I can't click on the cart button. That's not working yet, but everything else is working. Let me scroll up to see my original error here. So it says cannot convert undefined or null to an object. And this loop is basically inside of my sidebar component. So it's complaining about this line here, line 25. I'm trying to loop through a cart object, get the quantity and key as well as the index. And basically it's saying that cart must be undefined value. So let me take a look in my app here. It's not opening, so let me actually take a look at the original code. And inside of my app.js, I have all of this code moved over, except this mounted here, but I don't need that anymore because I can now directly import the JSON file. I don't need to fetch it. So here's my sidebar component, and actually I didn't copy over any of the methods here, and I'm also forgetting to add in the props. So let me go ahead and do that. Just copy this, go back here to sidebar, and I do need a script tag at the bottom here. So I'm going to add a script tag, paste in the props, and then I also want the methods from here. So I'm going to grab those as well. Now calculate total and get price are defined. And then I also have all of the props here. So let's see if this works. Yay! And the toggle is perfectly working. Of course, it's starting off as open. If I refresh it, it just automatically opens. So let me change that in app.vue. I'll come here and say show sidebar is false. All right, let me see if we can use this. So it's not dynamically adding items to the cart yet. So we will fix that in the next video. In this video, we are going to hook up the add to cart functionality so that when we add to cart here, it will show up in the sidebar. If I look in the terminal right now, you can see that this add to cart, it's saying it's not a function. So I'm getting an error when I click this add to cart button. Now I can see why I'm getting that, because that is in my homepage component. And if I go down here, I can see this add to cart function that I'm calling when I click that button is not defined anywhere in this component. Where is that function defined? It is in the app.vue file. So if I go to my methods, I can see I have an add to cart method right here. I basically need to pass this function into my homepage for my homepage to be able to use. So I'm going to also pass that through the router as I did before, and then in my homepage I can also receive that as a prop. Add that onto the props list, add to cart. So I should have access to the function that I passed into this home component now through the router view. And let me refresh and see if this works. Add to cart, and you can see that the function is working because the quantity changed down to 0. The cart says 2 items, and if I open it, it does indeed list 2 items here. Now, why are there forward slashes here? We can actually see in the home page that in regular JavaScript, this is actually in the sidebar component, that in order to put a $sign before the variable, we needed to escape it. But we don't have to do that in a Vue JS application because it's no longer in a regular JavaScript file. It's in our Vue JS template. So I can get rid of all of these escaping characters. And now that looks much better. Now, if I want to delete this, it deletes, no longer have any items in the cart. I can add a couple items and I get items in the cart. If I go to another page, the cart should still work because that is a shared component that I can see across any page. In simple applications, this type of data sharing works pretty well. We can keep all of our variables in a parent component. So in this case, in our app.vue component, we pass functions and variables down to children, and then children can call functions like add to cart that will then update the state of the parent component. Now, in more complicated applications, we would need something a little bit more robust for state management and being able to share all of this data throughout our application. And we will talk about that in a future series where we cover Vuex, which is Vue JS's default state management library. But for right now, we are going to leave the application as it is and work on it in future series and lessons. So we have the home page, the cart sidebar. Now we really need to hook up some of the information on this page, so the products page. And it's really exactly the same as the products section here on the home page. We have all of the same kind of cards and information. So since we have the same thing pretty much in multiple places of the application, it makes sense to pull out all of this UI that makes up these cards into its own component, and then we can share it across the application and on any page that we want. So let's go ahead and create a card component. Now in components here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this productcard.vue. I'll start with a template, and now I'm going to go to my home page, and I can see there's a for loop here that is looping through and displaying all of the cards. So I'm going to grab this whole card here and paste it in my product card file. Now this is just an individual card, so I don't need a for loop in here. Let me get rid of this logic. And this will just be one card. Now I will need the product information for this card to display correctly. So I'm going to have to accept that as a prop in my component. So let me create a script tag. I'll create props here, just an array of props, and I'm going to say product. So I accept the product props into my component, and now I can use it in my template. Now I can remove all of this logic from here, and the only thing I need is actually to import that component. So I need to import product card from, I'm going to use my source folder shortcut /components and /product_card.vue. And now I need to register this as a component so I can use it. And now in my code up here, I'm going to use product card. I'll clean up the lines a little bit here. And I need to make this self-closing because all tags in Vue templates need to either be self-closing or having a closing tag. Now I am no longer using this index here. I'm going to see in my product if I'm using the index anywhere. And I am indeed passing in the index, so I will need to accept the index as a prop as well. Let me change this to index so it's a little bit more clear. And I will get index here, and I'm going to pass that in here. Of course, index is a variable, not a string, so I'll have to vbind that. And that should work here. Let's see if this works. And we are getting an error here. Now that is because product is now a prop, and of course we cannot mutate props from the parent component. So we can actually fix this by not mapping to the product prop at all, we're actually going to create a local variable inside of this product component. So each component, each time we use the product card component, it will have its own local variable. And we can do that by adding a data prop here. And in the method, we need a return. It returns an object. And now we can simply map quantity, because each card only has one input box. So we'll just map it internally in the card. And we can check that this works. I'm not sure why it only has 2 cards right now, but let's try this. So I press the number 2, and I can look in my Vue JS Dev Tools. And I'm getting an error here. And it says I can't read property name of undefined. So product.name. Yes, I believe I have forgotten to pass in the correct props here. So let me add those. I need to pass in product equals product. And then while I'm here, let me also add the add to cart function. Equals add to cart. There we go. And now let's check if the page loads. And the page is loading. All right, so now we have all of the cards loading. And let me just look in my Vue DevTools. I can see all of my product card components. So let me just take a look. If I change this to 2, and I can see the quantity is 2. If I change it to 22, it's now 22. All right, so that is mapping correctly. Now I need to get this quantity, the value, up through the home component to the app component, where I am actually performing the function of adding it to the cart. So what I'm going to do, for right now, I'm just going to pass in a third parameter, and I will pass in quantity. And now let's take a look at our function, our add to cart function in the app component. So we are adding items onto the cart if they're not already there, and then we are basically incrementing the number here. So now that we have that third parameter being passed in, which is the quantity, all we have to do is change this line to be plus equals quantity, which is now getting passed in. And then of course we don't need this line because we are no longer mapping to a nested quantity. Rather, we have the quantity variable right here. This also means that we don't need to pass up the index anymore. So we can remove that from this function. We only need the name and the quantity basically, so that we can add it to the cart. Let's check and see if this works. If I come here, the number still maps to the component. Now if I click add to cart, it is not in my cart. Let's see if we got an error. Add to cart is not a function. Let me look inside of my home.vue. I have add to cart that I am getting from the parent component. So from the app component, I'm passing that in to the product card. And I should have it. Oh, right, I didn't accept it as a prop inside of the product card. So now let's see if this works. Let me refresh and go into my Vue DevTools. And now I can see it's properly working here. If I want to add 10 artichokes, and I have 2 radishes, and I have 12 items in the cart. Now my rounding functionality isn't properly working, as you can see, but it is properly adding and displaying the quantity and the total in the cart. But I don't just want this functionality on the home page, I also want it on the products page. So let me import those components into the products page now. So if I come to my products.vue file, I actually have access to inventory already in here, because if you remember in my app.vue, I am passing inventory and the add to cart function into anything displayed by the router view, which is basically any of our pages here, home, past orders, or products. They are all connected to our router. So let's accept those props in the products page to start with. First, let me fold up all of these cards, get them out of the way. So let me do a script tag props, and I'm going to accept inventory and add to cart. One more thing I need to do is import this product card. So I'm going to go to the home component and just copy this import and paste it into product or into the products page. And now I need to define this as a component here. Product card, and this should be components, not component. And I also have one more error here, which this should be a capital P. And now if I highlight this, all of these highlight. Let me take a look at what this error is here. The product card component has been registered but not used. So let's fix that. So I basically have all of these cards here for the different items that show up on the page. I'm actually going to just delete all of these right now. And instead, I'm going to add the product card. So if I go to home, I can take a look at my product card that I'm actually using inside the template. And I'm just going to copy that and paste it here. But instead of slicing at 3 here, let me just do the first 6 elements instead. Now, because we already have inventory being passed in, as well as the add to cart function, of course inside the loop, we're taking care of the product variable. There's really no other state that we have locally on the products component. So this should pretty much work out of the box for us. Let's check here. And we can see that it does indeed loop through and display all of the cards on the products page. Now, let me add a couple of these items to the cart here. And you can see the cart just updated with 5. If I add a few artichokes, let's add some cherries and some cabbage, carrots, everything, right? We have 17 items in the cart now. And we can see that it added all of these items. Now if I go to the home page, I can still see 17 items in the cart. Because we moved to a single page application, all of our routing is handled by the Vue JS JavaScript, and we are actually sharing state between components. So all of the state for our cart lives in the app component, which is the parent component of all the other pages, the home page, the product page, and that's why all of the items in the cart, all of the data that we save here in our application, it stays no matter what page we navigate to. And even though this is displayed, or this card is on multiple pages, you can see how Vue made it very easy for us to reuse the same code and the same template to loop through and display wherever we wanted on the application. And that's basically how reusable components work in Vue.js. I hope you enjoyed this course. and you learned a lot about Vue JS, learning it on 3 different levels through this course. We started off working in a basic index.html file, and then we went on to a static site, upgrading it a little bit with some Vue JS, and then we moved on to using the Vue CLI and creating a fully dynamic single-page application that we have here. Definitely reach out to me if you have any feedback, comments, or questions about this course. You can find me on Twitter and pretty much everywhere online as Gwen Faraday or at Faraday Academy. Have a great day, and I hope to see you in the next course.